Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The silence should have been my first warning. Not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful neighborhood, but something heavier. A suffocating absence that pressed against my eardrums like cotton wool. When I first turned onto Sycamore Lane with the moving truck rumbling behind me, the street stretched out like a photograph someone had forgotten to populate. Perfect lawns, pristine sidewalks, houses that looked lived in, yet somehow abandoned. The real estate agent's nervous chatter about motivated sellers and unique opportunity echoed in my mind as I pulled into the driveway of number 47. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been desperate. The job transfer had come suddenly, and finding affordable housing in a new city felt like searching for water in a desert. Then this listing appeared, a 2-story colonial at half the market rate, available immediately. The landlord, a thin man whose handshake felt like grabbing a bundle of cold twigs, had practically thrown the keys at me after a 5-minute walkthrough. No background check, no references. Just a mumbled comment about being glad someone finally wanted the place. I should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why the rent was so cheap, why the neighbors' curtains never seemed to move, why the street felt like it was holding its breath. But desperation makes fools of us all. The house itself was unremarkable. Hardwood floors that creaked in all the expected places. A kitchen that hadn't been updated since the 90s. Windows that rattled when the wind picked up. I spent the first day unpacking, trying to ignore the way sound seemed to die just beyond my property line. No birds, no distant traffic, no children playing. Just my own movements echoing through empty rooms. Night fell like a curtain dropping, sudden and complete. The streetlights outside flickered on, casting pools of yellow that somehow made the darkness between them seem deeper. I was arranging books on a shelf when the clock in the hallway chimed midnight, its bronze tone reverberating longer than it should have. Then I heard them. Footsteps on the pavement outside. Measured, deliberate steps, neither hurried nor slow. The sound of someone walking with purpose. Relief washed over me. Finally, proof that I wasn't alone in this suburban tomb. I moved to the window, eager to catch a glimpse of my mysterious neighbor, perhaps wave hello. Establish some kind of human connection in this eerily quiet place. The street was empty, but the footsteps continued, clear and distinct. Leather soles on concrete, getting closer, then farther, then closer again. I pressed my face against the glass, my breath fogging the window, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just those empty pools of light and the darkness that seemed to pulse between them. The footsteps stopped directly in front of my house. I held my breath, waiting. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then, as suddenly as they'd stopped, they resumed, fading gradually into the distance. I stood at that window for another hour, watching, waiting, but the street remained stubbornly deserted. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by dreams of invisible crowds marching past my window, their footsteps shaking the foundation of the house. I woke repeatedly, certain I'd heard something, only to be greeted by that oppressive silence. The second night was worse. Again, at midnight, the footsteps began. This time, I was ready. I positioned myself at different windows, trying to triangulate the source of the sound. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding the house like water filling a basin. When I cracked open the front door, the sound stopped immediately, as if whatever was making it had been waiting for me to look. The air outside felt different, thicker, older somehow. It carried a scent I couldn't quite place, something between wet earth and burnt copper. I stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning under my weight. The street stretched out before me, bathed in that sickly yellow light, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw shapes moving just beyond the edge of visibility. Shadows that didn't match any object, movements that didn't follow any pattern. I retreated inside, locking the door behind me, then immediately felt foolish. Locked against what? Footsteps? Shadows? the increasing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with this place. By the third night, I developed a routine. At 11:55, I would position myself in the living room, lights off, watching the street through a gap in the curtains. At midnight precisely, the footsteps would begin. Sometimes one set, sometimes what sounded like dozens. They would circle my house, pause at the property line, then continue on their mysterious route. It was 2:47 a.m. when the knocking started. 3 measured raps on the front door, loud enough to echo through the house. I jolted from the chair where I'd been dozing, my heart hammering against my ribs. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. I crept toward the door, avoiding the squeaky floorboard near the stairs, and peered through the peephole. The porch was empty, but the knocking continued. Not just at the front door now, but spreading around the house. Windows, walls, the back door. A symphony of knuckles on wood and glass, growing louder, more demanding. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching the doors and windows vibrate with each impact, certain that at any moment something would break through. Then, silence. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, exhaustion made everything feel unreal. Colors seemed oversaturated, sounds came from the wrong directions, and my reflection in the mirror looked somehow unfamiliar. I tried to work from home, but concentration was impossible. Every small sound made me jump. The house had begun to feel less like shelter and more like a trap. I needed answers. The local library's archives revealed nothing unusual about Sycamore Lane. No murders, no tragedies, no ancient burial grounds. Just a normal street in a normal neighborhood, developed in the 1950s, unremarkable in every way. But the librarian, an elderly woman with eyes like clouded marbles, had given me a strange look when I mentioned my address. The fourth night brought new horrors. The footsteps came as expected, but now they were accompanied by whispers. Not in any language I recognized, but somehow still conveying meaning. They spoke of things that shouldn't be, of spaces between spaces, of doors that opened onto nothing. The knocking had evolved too, becoming a complex rhythm that seemed to follow some otherworldly logic. But the worst part was when I started to recognize patterns. The footsteps weren't random. They traced specific routes, like patrols or processions. The whispers rose and fell with the streetlights flickering. And the knocking was trying to communicate something. On the 5th night, I made a decision. When the footsteps began, I would go outside. I would confront whatever was happening, even if it meant confirming my worst fears, that I was losing my mind. Midnight came with its usual punctuality. The footsteps started, closer than ever, and I threw open the front door before I could lose my nerve. The night air hit me like a physical force, thick with that copper earth smell, and for a moment my vision swam. When it cleared, I saw them. Not clearly, not directly, but in the way you might see heat shimmer on hot asphalt, figures moving through the street, translucent and shifting, neither fully there nor completely absent. They walked with purpose, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all following the same invisible paths. And they were looking at me. I couldn't see their faces. They didn't seem to have faces in any conventional sense, but I felt their attention like cold fingers on my skin. One figure separated from the group, moving toward my house with that measured, deliberate gait I'd been hearing for days. It stopped at my property line. We stood there, separated by some invisible barrier, studying each other. I could make out more details now. The suggestion of clothing from another era, the hint of features that weren't quite human, the way it seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. Then it spoke, not with words, but directly into my mind. You shouldn't be here. The message came with images, feelings, knowledge that my brain couldn't quite process. This street, this neighborhood, existed in a fold between realities. During the day, it was anchored to our world, but at night, it drifted into something else. The previous tenants had all discovered this truth eventually. Some had fled immediately. Others had stayed too long and become something else. I was being given a choice, I realized. Leave now, tonight, and never return. or stay and risk becoming part of whatever nightly procession walked these streets. The figure waited patiently for my decision, and behind it, the others continued their eternal patrol. The rational part of my mind screamed that this was impossible, that I was having a psychotic break, that none of this could be real. But the evidence of my senses was overwhelming. The weight of their presence, the way reality bent around them, the terrible certainty that I was seeing something true, even if I couldn't understand it. I backed slowly into my house, never taking my eyes off the figure. It remained at the property line, watching, waiting. Once inside, I grabbed only the essentials: wallet, keys, phone, laptop. Everything else could be replaced. Within minutes, I was in my car, reversing out of the driveway with shaking hands. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The street was full of them now, no longer hiding, no longer pretending. They stood in neat rows, watching my departure with what might have been satisfaction or disappointment. I couldn't tell which. I drove through the night, putting as much distance as possible between myself and Sycamore Lane. I found a motel 3 towns over and collapsed into a fitful sleep, plagued by dreams of endless processions and doors that opened onto impossible spaces. It's been 3 months now. I've found a new place in a busy, noisy neighborhood where the sounds of traffic and human life never fully fade. I've never been more grateful for noise pollution, for the constant reminder that I'm surrounded by the living. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I made the right choice. The figure's message hadn't been a threat exactly, more like a warning, or perhaps an invitation. What would have happened if I'd stayed? Would I have joined their nightly patrol, walking invisible streets for purposes I couldn't comprehend? Or would I have simply disappeared, like the previous tenants, leaving behind only questions and a house offered at suspiciously low rent? I've tried researching what I experienced, but nothing quite fits. Hauntings, dimensional rifts, temporal anomalies, all close, but not quite right. Whatever exists on Sycamore Lane doesn't fit into our neat categories of the paranormal. Last week I received an email from the landlord, just one line: "The house is still available if you change your mind." I deleted it immediately, but the offer haunts me, because despite the terror, despite the very real danger, part of me wants to go back. Part of me needs to understand what I witnessed, to know whether it was real or if I've simply lost my mind. The worst part is the uncertainty. If it was real, then everything I thought I knew about the world is wrong. If it wasn't, then I can't trust my own perceptions, my own mind. Either possibility is terrifying in its own way. Sometimes, very late at night when the city noise dies down just enough, I swear I can hear them. Distant footsteps following their eternal route, walking streets that exist between here and somewhere else. And I wonder if they can hear me too, if they're waiting for me to return, to make a different choice. The house on Sycamore Lane is still listed online. The rent has dropped even lower. The photos show my abandoned belongings still in place, as if I'd simply vanished one night. Which, in a way, I suppose I did. The person who moved into that house, desperate and naive, no longer exists. In his place is someone who knows that reality has thin spots, places where other things bleed through. I've started seeing a therapist, trying to process what happened. She thinks I had a stress-induced psychotic episode brought on by the isolation and the pressure of the job transfer. Maybe she's right. It would be comforting to believe that, to have a neat medical explanation for everything. But then I remember the weight of their presence, the certainty in that moment that I was seeing something true. And I know deep in my bones that Sycamore Lane is still there, still empty during the day, still full of impossible visitors at night. Waiting. Always waiting. Story 2. I should have known something was wrong when the landlord couldn't meet my eyes during the signing. His fingers trembled as he handed me the keys, and he muttered something about the boiler being temperamental before hurrying out into the December cold. But the rent was half what anywhere else in Philadelphia was asking, and my freelance writing wasn't exactly bringing in steady income. The brownstones squatted on a narrow street in Fishtown, squeezed between identical buildings like a tooth wedged too tightly in a jaw. My apartment occupied the entire ground floor, a luxury I couldn't have afforded anywhere else. The previous tenant had left abruptly, the landlord explained, leaving behind furniture covered in dust sheets and walls freshly painted in a shade of white so bright it hurt to look at directly. The boiler broke on my third night there. I could hear it wheezing and clanking in the basement below, metal grinding against metal in a rhythm that sounded almost deliberate. The radiators went cold, frost creeping across the windows, but my apartment stayed warm. Not just warm, perfectly, unnaturally consistent. I discovered this by accident. After a week of the broken boiler, I bought a digital thermometer to document the temperature for a potential complaint to the landlord. The living room read 73.4 degrees Fahrenheit. The bedroom, 73.4 degrees Fahrenheit. The bathroom, with its supposedly drafty window, 73.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Only when I placed the thermometer inside the built-in closet in the hallway did the reading change. A steady, unwavering 73.0 degrees Fahrenheit, the decimal never flickering even once. The warmth came from the baseboards, I realized, not from the radiator system connected to the broken boiler, but from the baseboards themselves. Late at night, when the city quieted and I lay awake listening to the building settle, I could hear air moving through them. A soft exhalation that carried the scent of old newspaper, and something else. Something organic and faintly sweet, like fruit just beginning to turn. I started documenting everything in a notebook, the way I'd been taught in journalism school. Temperatures at different times of day, the patterns of the warm air, the sounds the building made. Reading back through my entries now, I can see the progression, the slow unraveling that I couldn't recognize at the time. December 15th. Closet maintains exactly 73.0 degrees Fahrenheit regardless of external conditions. Tested with 3 different thermometers. December 18th. Steam or vapor visible under door at 3:17 a.m. Dissipates when door opened. Leaves condensation marks on fresh paint. December 20th. Condensation patterns resemble handprints. 5 fingers, but proportions seem off. Too long. Taking photographs. The photographs never developed properly. Every image of the handprints came out overexposed, white blurs against white walls, as if the camera couldn't quite capture what I was seeing. I began spending more time in the closet, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't name. It was a narrow space, barely wide enough for me to stand in, with walls that felt older than the rest of the apartment. The paint here was different too. Not the harsh white of the other rooms, but a softer, yellowed color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When I pressed my ear to the back wall of the closet, I could hear breathing. Not the mechanical wheeze of the boiler or the whistle of wind through old pipes, but actual breathing. Slow, rhythmic inhalations and exhalations that matched my own breath, but delayed by half a beat, as if something was listening to me breathe, and then copying the pattern a moment later. I told myself it was an acoustic trick, sound traveling through the building's ventilation system. Old buildings did strange things with sound, but I started timing the breathing with my phone's stopwatch, and the delay was always exactly 0.7 seconds. Always. Whether I breathed fast or slow, held my breath or hyperventilated, the echo came 0.7 seconds later. The first time I saw the walls move, I'd been living there for 3 weeks. I was working late, transcribing an interview for a magazine piece, when movement in my peripheral vision made me look up. The wall behind my desk was expanding and contracting, so slightly that I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I placed my hand against it, I felt it, a subtle pulsing, like touching someone's chest as they breathed. I started sleeping on the couch after that, as far from the walls as I could get. But the apartment wouldn't let me escape that easily. The warm air from the baseboards grew thicker, more oppressive, carrying that sweet, sick smell more strongly. The handprints on the door multiplied, appearing not just in condensation, but in the paint itself, as if something was pressing through from the other side. I tried to research the building's history, but the records were frustratingly incomplete. The brownstone had been built in 1897, that much was clear. But there were gaps. Years where no ownership was recorded, periods where the building seemed to simply not exist in city documents. The Philadelphia Historical Commission had a file on it, but when I went to view it, half the pages were missing, torn out so roughly that fragments of text remained on the margins. What I could piece together was disturbing. The building had been a boarding house originally, then a private residence, then abandoned for nearly 2 decades in the 1960s and 70s. When it was finally renovated and converted to apartments in 1981, the construction crew had reported finding the walls filled with an unusual insulation material, something organic that had to be removed wearing hazmat suits. The nature of the material was never specified in the surviving documents. By January, I'd stopped pretending the apartment was normal. The walls breathed constantly now, not just at night. The temperature in the closet had risen to exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, body temperature, while the rest of the apartment maintained its steady 73.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And the breathing from behind the walls had synchronized with mine so completely that I couldn't tell where my breath ended and the buildings began. I decided to open up the wall. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when I took a hammer to the closet's back wall. The first blow sent a shudder through the entire building, and for a moment, the breathing stopped. The silence was worse than the sound had ever been. Then the wall began to bleed. Not blood, but something clear and viscous, like lymph fluid, seeping through the cracks in the plaster. Behind the plaster was not wooden studs or insulation, but something that looked like tissue, pink and glistening, threaded with what could have been veins or just old electrical wiring that had somehow become organic. It pulsed with that familiar rhythm, and when I touched it, God help me, I touched it. It was warm and yielding, like pressing your finger into someone's arm. I stumbled backward, and that's when I saw them. Eyes, dozens of them, opened in the walls all around me. Not painted or carved, but actual eyes, with irises that dilated when I shined my phone's flashlight on them. They blinked in unison, tears streaming down the walls, and I realized that the building wasn't haunted. The building was alive, or something was alive within it. Something that had been sleeping or dormant until I'd moved in. Something that had been breathing in rhythm with every tenant who'd ever lived here, learning their patterns, their temperatures, their very biological signatures. I ran, left everything behind and ran out into the frozen January night. But here's the thing about running from something that's gotten inside you. You can leave the place, but you can't leave what it's done to you. It's been 3 weeks since I fled the brownstone. I'm staying with a friend in West Philly, sleeping on his couch, trying to pretend everything is normal. But my body temperature has stabilized at exactly 73.4 degrees Fahrenheit. No matter how many blankets I use or how high I turn the heat, I can't get warm. The doctors can't explain it. They've run every test they can think of, but according to medical science, I should be dead. And at night, when everything is quiet, I can still hear it. That breathing, 0.7 seconds behind my own. Sometimes I catch myself breathing in sync with it, and in those moments I feel a warmth spreading through me that has nothing to do with temperature. My friend says I talk in my sleep now, but the words aren't in any language he recognizes. He's recorded it, played it back for me. It sounds like breathing formed into syllables, like something learning to speak through lungs that aren't its own. I've been researching organ transplants lately, not because I need one, but because I've become obsessed with the stories, recipients who claim to have inherited memories, preferences, even mannerisms from their donors. They call it cellular memory, the idea that tissues can store information beyond what science currently understands. What if buildings could do the same? What if that brownstone had been absorbing everyone who'd ever lived there, breathing them in and incorporating them into its structure? All those missing years in the city records, all those tenants who'd left suddenly. What if they never really left at all? I went back once, just to look at it from the outside. The for rent sign was already up, and I saw a young couple examining it, the woman pregnant, her hand resting on her belly. I wanted to warn them, but what would I say? That the building breathes? That it has a body temperature? That it will synchronize with their unborn child's heartbeat until they can't tell where they end and it begins? They wouldn't believe me. No one does. But late at night, when I'm lying on my friend's couch, I can feel it calling me back. Not in words, but in that rhythm. That 0.7-second delay that's become as familiar as my own pulse. And sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, I find myself walking toward Fishtown, drawn by something I can't name or resist. The brownstone is still there, waiting. The for rent sign is gone now, someone else has moved in. I stand across the street and watch the windows, and sometimes I see shadows moving behind the curtains that don't match any human shape. But the worst part is when I see a perfectly normal silhouette, someone just living their life, not knowing that the walls are learning their breathing patterns, their temperature, the very rhythm of their existence. I've started a blog, anonymous of course, documenting everything. Other people have reached out. Former tenants from that building and others like it in Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston, old East Coast cities with old buildings that breathe. We compare notes, share temperature readings, describe the sounds we still hear. None of us can get warm anymore. And all of us, every single one, have that same 0.7-second delay in our breathing now, as if something is still listening, still copying, still learning how to be human through our involuntary functions. The doctor I'm seeing says it's a form of PTSD, that I've developed a psychological condition from living in substandard housing. She's prescribed medication that I don't take. How can I explain to her that it's not trauma but transformation? That something in that building changed me on a cellular level? That I'm not entirely myself anymore? Sometimes I wonder if I ever left the apartment at all. Maybe I'm still there, in that closet with its perfect body temperature, and everything since has been a dream or a delusion. Maybe the building has absorbed me so completely that what thinks it's me, typing this story, is just an echo, a breathing pattern it learned to replicate. Or maybe, and this is the thought that keeps me awake, that makes me check my temperature obsessively, maybe I'm still becoming something else. Maybe the transformation isn't complete. Maybe that 73.4 degrees Fahrenheit is just the beginning, and eventually I'll stabilize at something else entirely, something that isn't quite human anymore. The breathing continues, always 0.7 seconds behind my own. I've stopped trying to change my rhythm to throw it off. We breathe together now, the building and I, or whatever remains of us both. And sometimes, in those synchronized moments, I can almost understand what it's trying to tell me. But understanding, I'm learning, isn't the same as escaping. And some transformations, once begun, can never be reversed. I still dream about that closet, about the perfect 73.0 degrees Fahrenheit that later became 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Body temperature. But whose body? The building's? Mine? Or something we're becoming together, one breath at a time, 0.7 seconds apart until eventually, inevitably, we synchronize completely? I won't go back. I tell myself this every day. But my temperature dropped to 73.3 degrees Fahrenheit this morning. The building is calling me home. Story 3. The ferry lurched violently to starboard, and I grabbed the doorframe of my cabin to steady myself. Through the porthole, the angry waters of the inside passage churned black under the November sky. The vessel groaned against another swell, and I heard someone's luggage crash down the corridor outside. Yet inside my cabin, nothing moved. The water glass I'd placed on the nightstand an hour ago hadn't budged. Not a ripple disturbed its surface. The condensation on the window ran in perfectly straight lines, defying the ship's violent dance. I pressed my palm against the wall. I could feel the ferry's engines thrumming through the metal, could hear the hull protesting against each wave. But the cabin existed in its own pocket of stillness, like a photograph suspended in the middle of a hurricane. I'd boarded in Juneau 6 hours earlier, grateful to find the ferry only half full. November wasn't tourist season, and most locals flew between the southeastern Alaskan towns when they could afford it. The purser, a weathered woman with tobacco-stained fingers, had handed me the key to cabin 47 without looking up from her crossword. "Rough seas tonight," she'd muttered. "Hope you've got a strong stomach." The first few hours had been uneventful. I'd stowed my duffel bag, tried to read, given up when the words started swimming on the page. The steadiness of the cabin should have been a blessing. No seasickness, no stumbling around trying to keep my balance. Instead, it made my skin crawl. Physics didn't work this way. I stepped into the corridor to test my sanity. Immediately, the floor tilted beneath me, and I had to brace myself against the wall as the ferry rolled. A man stumbled past, green-faced, heading for the bathroom. The normalcy of his suffering reassured me. Back in my cabin, the stillness engulfed me again. The transition was seamless. One step from chaos to absolute calm. The digital clock read 11:47 p.m., 7 more hours to Sitka. I tried to sleep but couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin was watching me. Not someone in the cabin itself. The walls seemed to lean in when I wasn't looking directly at them. The overhead light hummed at a frequency that made my teeth ache. I turned it off and lay in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of the storm outside my bubble of unnatural calm. At 3 a.m. exactly, the light flickered on by itself. In the brief strobe, I saw someone sitting on the edge of my bed. Male, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a ferry uniform from decades past. The light steadied, and the figure vanished, but the mattress held the depression where he'd been sitting. I watched it slowly rise back to its original shape, the springs creaking softly. My hands shook as I reached for the light switch. It was already in the off position. The emergency radio mounted on the wall crackled to life. Static at first, then a voice. Hollow, mechanical. 4723817. My birthday. April 7th, 1981. The coordinates were wrong by 1 digit, but close enough to make my mouth go dry. The voice repeated the numbers 3 times, then cut out. I grabbed my phone to record it if it happened again, but the screen wouldn't turn on. Dead battery, though I'd charged it fully in Juneau. The backup charger in my bag was dead too. Even my watch had stopped at 3 a.m. The stillness in the cabin intensified. It wasn't just the absence of motion anymore. It was an active force, pressing against my eardrums, making each breath feel like work. I needed to get out. The door wouldn't budge. Not locked. I could turn the handle freely. But the door itself might as well have been welded to the frame. I threw my shoulder against it, feeling the impact jar through my bones, but it didn't even rattle. Through the porthole in the door, I could see the corridor beyond, empty and tilting with the ship's movement. I was about to start yelling when I saw him again, the figure from my bed, now standing in the corridor. He faced away from me, but I could see his reflection in the polished metal of the opposite wall. Where his face should have been was a smooth expanse of skin, broken only by a horizontal gash that opened and closed like it was trying to speak. He turned toward my door, and I stumbled backward. Through the porthole, the corridor was empty again, but I could hear breathing that wasn't mine, slow, deliberate inhalations that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I retreated to the bed, pulling my knees to my chest like a child. The cabin's stillness had weight now, pressing down on me. The straight lines of condensation on the window began to shift, forming letters. You were supposed to be on the other one. The other one. My mind raced. I'd originally booked passage on last month's ferry, but changed my plans at the last minute. That ferry, I'd seen it on the news. Engine failure in a storm. It had drifted for 16 hours before the Coast Guard found it. No casualties, the report said, though several passengers were hospitalized for hypothermia and what the news delicately called psychological trauma. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't coordinates. It was a passenger manifest being read in that same hollow voice. Names I didn't recognize until Cabin 47. My name, but not quite. The middle initial was different. 1 letter off. The stillness shattered. The cabin lurched so violently I was thrown from the bed. The water glass flew across the room, shattering against the wall. The condensation on the window ran in wild rivulets. I could feel the ferry's true movement now, violent and disorienting. The door flew open on its own, and I didn't hesitate. I ran. The corridors were empty but not silent. I could hear whispers from behind closed cabin doors, conversations that seemed to be happening in reverse. The ferry's layout made no sense. Hallways led to dead ends that shouldn't exist. Stairs descended to levels that couldn't be there. I passed the same fire extinguisher 4 times, though I never doubled back. Finally, I found the passenger lounge. A handful of people sat scattered among the seats, all facing the windows, all perfectly still. Too still, like my cabin had been. "Excuse me," I said to the nearest passenger, a woman in a rain jacket. "Is this normal?" The stillness, I mean. She turned to look at me, and her face was wrong. Not deformed, just off, like someone had described a human face to an artist who'd never seen one. "What stillness?" she asked, her voice layered like multiple recordings played slightly out of sync. "Can't you feel the storm?" I looked around the lounge. Everyone had turned to stare at me now, all with those almost right faces. The ferry rolled hard to port, and they all moved with it, synchronized, while I had to fight to keep my balance. "He's not supposed to be here," one of them said. "Wrong ferry," said another. "Wrong number. 1 digit off." They stood in unison and began walking toward me. Not threatening exactly, but inevitable, like a tide coming in. I backed toward the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door stayed sealed. The woman in the rain jacket reached out to touch my arm. Her hand was ice cold and slightly damp, like she'd been in the water. "You need to go back to your cabin," she said, her layered voice making my teeth ache. "Stay still until we reach port." "What happens when we reach port?" She tilted her head at an impossible angle. "You get off, or you stay on. 1 digit makes all the difference." The lights went out. Complete darkness for 3 seconds, and when they came back on, I was alone in the lounge. Through the windows, I could see Sitka's lights in the distance, maybe an hour away. The storm had calmed, and the ferry moved through the water smooth as silk. I made my way back to cabin 47, though I didn't remember the route. The door was open, my belongings undisturbed. The broken glass was gone. The water stain on the wall vanished. Everything exactly as it had been when I'd first entered, down to the water glass on the nightstand, perfectly still and full. The emergency radio crackled one last time. "Arrival in Sitka delayed by 1 hour. Repeat. Arrival delayed by 1 hour." But through my porthole, the dock was getting closer. I could see people waiting, cars lined up to board. The ferry's engines had shifted to reverse, slowing our approach. We'd arrive exactly on time. I packed my bag with shaking hands, not caring that my clothes were still damp with sweat. The moment the ferry touched the dock, I was pushing through the crowd to disembark. The purser was at her station as I passed, the same woman who'd checked me in. "Have a good trip?" she asked, looking up from her crossword. "The cabin," I started, then stopped. What could I say that wouldn't sound insane? The cabin was very still. She laughed, a raspy sound. "Cabin 47? You're lucky. That one's got the best stabilizers, smooth as glass even in rough seas." I was halfway down the gangplank when she called after me. "Same time next month?" I turned back, confused. "What?" "Your return ticket. You booked a round trip monthly. Juneau to Sitka, every 3rd Thursday." I hadn't. I'd bought a one-way ticket. I pulled out my phone to check my email confirmation, but the screen showed something different. Dozens of confirmations, all for the same route, stretching back years. All for cabin 47, all with my name, but the middle initial was wrong, 1 digit off. The purser was still watching me, waiting for an answer. Behind her, through the ferry's windows, I could see the passengers in the lounge, all facing outward, all perfectly still. The woman in the rain jacket raised her hand in a slow wave. "I'll think about it," I managed, and fled down the gangplank. It's been 3 weeks now. Every night at 3 a.m., my bedroom light flickers. Sometimes I see that uniformed figure sitting on my bed, always just for a moment. The emergency weather radio I've never owned turns on by itself, broadcasting coordinates that are almost, but not quite, my birthday. Yesterday, I got an email. A booking confirmation for next month's ferry, Juneau to Sitka, cabin 47. I didn't make the reservation. When I called to cancel, they had no record of it. But the charge appeared on my credit card anyway. The email signature was my name, with the middle initial off by one letter. I've been searching online for any record of what happened to last month's ferry, the one I was supposed to be on. Every news article has been scrubbed. The Coast Guard has no record of any incident. But I found one forum post, cached on an old server, before it too disappeared. Engine failure my ass. My cousin was on that ferry. Says they drifted into something. Not somewhere, something. Half the passengers came back different. Wrong. Off by just enough to notice if you're paying attention. Like they're one digit away from being themselves. The third Thursday is coming up fast. Part of me wants to stay as far from that ferry as possible, but another part, a growing part, needs to know what's in cabin 47, why the stillness, why my name is on that manifest with the wrong initial, why one digit makes all the difference. Maybe I'm supposed to be on that ferry. Maybe I already am. The ticket is in my wallet. I didn't put it there. I think I'm going to use it. Story 4. The Arizona sun was bleeding orange across the horizon when I pulled into the rest stop on I-17, somewhere between Phoenix and Flagstaff. My throat felt like sandpaper, and the gas station coffee from 3 hours ago had long since abandoned any pretense of keeping me alert. Just a quick stop, water, bathroom, stretch the legs, then back on the road. The rest area squatted beside the highway like something that had given up trying to be presentable. Beige concrete walls stained with years of desert dust. A few struggling mesquite trees offering patches of shade, and that particular smell of hot asphalt mixed with diesel fumes that every highway rest stop shares. Normal. Forgettable. Exactly what I needed. The vending machines hummed against the building's north wall, their lights flickering in the gathering dusk. I fed a crumpled $5 bill into the water machine. The mechanism whirred, something dropped with a satisfying thunk, and coins rattled into the change slot. I grabbed the bottle and scooped up my change without looking, until my fingers registered something odd. 3 coins. A quarter with a deep scratch running diagonally across Washington's face. A dime that caught the fluorescent light wrong, too bright, like it had been polished obsessively. A penny, dated this year, pristine except for a small dent near Lincoln's temple. Strange how you notice these things. I pocketed the coins and twisted open the water bottle, taking a long drink. The liquid was cold, almost painfully so, with a metallic aftertaste that made me check the expiration date. Still good for another 6 months. The bathroom door squealed on rusted hinges. Inside, the fluorescent tubes buzzed and flickered, casting everything in that sickly greenish light that makes everyone look dead. The tiles were cracked but clean, and someone had recently mopped. The sharp smell of industrial disinfectant couldn't quite mask something else underneath, something organic and wrong. I turned on the tap to wash my hands. The water came out ice cold, so cold it hurt, and I watched it hit the porcelain sink and immediately begin to steam. Not steam exactly, more like it was evaporating on contact, leaving no wetness behind. I held my hand under the stream, felt the cold bite into my skin, but when I pulled away, my hand was completely dry. The fluorescent light above me strobed once, twice, and in that stuttering darkness I saw them. Wet footprints leading from the shower stall to the mirror. Not a trail exactly, just 2 perfect impressions of bare feet. One at the stall door, one directly in front of the mirror. No drops between them, no smears, as if someone had teleported from one spot to the other. The water was still running, still evaporating. I turned it off and backed toward the door, my shoes squeaking on the tiles. The footprints were already fading, the water, or whatever it was, disappearing into nothing. Outside, the desert air felt thick and oppressive despite the dropping temperature. The sun had fully set now, leaving only a purple bruise along the horizon. The parking lot lights had come on, casting long shadows between the handful of parked cars. A semi-truck idled in the commercial vehicle section, its running lights creating a constellation of red dots in the darkness. I needed to leave. The feeling came sudden and urgent, like when you're swimming and suddenly become aware of how deep the water is beneath you. But my mouth was still dry, that metallic taste lingering. I looked at the vending machine, at the coins in my pocket. Just one more bottle. For the road. I fed the quarter into the slot first, heard it rattle down into the machine's guts. The dime next, that too bright surface catching the light one more time before disappearing. The penny last. The machine hummed, considering, then spat all 3 coins back out. The quarter with the scratch, the bright dime, the dented penny. I picked them up, examining them under the harsh vending machine light. Same coins. Had to be. The scratch was identical, running from 1 o'clock to 7 o'clock across Washington's face. The dime had the same unnatural shine. The penny's dent was in exactly the same spot. Coincidence? Had to be. Vending machines reject coins all the time. I fed them in again, this time adding a dollar bill to make sure I had enough. The machine accepted the bill, dispensed a water bottle, and gave me change. 3 coins rattled into the slot. My hand hesitated over the change return. I could see them through the scratched plastic window. A quarter, a dime, a penny. I pulled them out. The scratch, the shine, the dent. The parking lot suddenly felt very empty. The semi-truck's idle had taken on a rhythm that seemed to match my accelerated heartbeat. I looked around, searching for another person, anyone who could confirm what I was seeing. The rest stop's small office building had a light on inside. Someone would be there. Someone had to be. I walked toward the office, the coins heavy in my pocket. They clinked together with each step, a metallic heartbeat that seemed too loud in the desert quiet. Through the glass door, I could see an attendant behind a counter, lit by the blue glow of security monitors. The door chimed when I entered. The attendant looked up, mid-50s, weathered face, the kind of guy who'd spent his whole life in the desert and had the sun damage to prove it. His name tag read Coyote Bill's Desert Oasis, but no actual name. Help you? His voice was flat, uninterested. I pulled out the coins, set them on the counter. This is going to sound crazy, but these coins, the vending machine keeps giving them back to me, the exact same ones. He looked at the coins without touching them. Machine's been acting up. Maintenance comes Thursday. No, you don't understand. It's the same coins. This scratch, this dent. Lots of coins got scratches. He turned back to his monitors. There's something else. In the bathroom. The water, it evaporates immediately. And there were footprints. Now he looked interested. Not concerned. Interested. He swiveled one of the monitors toward me. Which bathroom? The men's room, on the north side. He clicked through several camera feeds until he found one labeled North Restrooms. The timestamp showed the current time. He rewound it 5 minutes to when I would have been inside. The screen showed the bathroom entrance. I watched myself walk in. A moment later, I walked in again. Not sequentially, simultaneously. 2 of me, entering the same door at the same time, their bodies overlapping in a way that made my eyes water to follow. That's not... I started. He clicked to another camera, this one apparently inside the bathroom, though I hadn't noticed any cameras in there. The footage showed me at the sink, washing my hands. It also showed me at the mirror, staring at my reflection. At the same time, the same person in 2 places, performing different actions. Security system's been glitching too, the attendant said, his voice still maddeningly calm. Maintenance comes Thursday. I watched the 2 versions of myself on the screen. One finished washing and walked toward the door. The other remained at the mirror, unmoving. As the first me left, the second one turned, not toward the door, but toward the camera. It seemed to look directly at me through the monitor, through time, through whatever barrier should have prevented this impossibility. That's still in there, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That other me, it's still in the bathroom. The attendant shrugged. Probably just a playback error. Old system, you know. But I could see it on the screen. The timestamp was current now, live feed, and that other version of me was still standing at the mirror, still staring at the camera, waiting. I need to leave. I backed toward the door. Sure you don't want to check it out? Might be interesting. The attendant's expression hadn't changed, but something in his voice had shifted. An undercurrent of amusement, maybe. Or hunger. I fumbled for the door handle, my hands slick with sweat that shouldn't have been there in the desert dryness. The coins in my pocket seemed to burn through the fabric. As I pulled the door open, the electronic chime sounded wrong, pitched too low, stretched out like a groan. The parking lot had changed. Not obviously, not in any way I could immediately point to, but the shadows were wrong. Too long for the angle of the lights. Too dark for shadows to be. My car sat where I'd left it, but it took me a moment to recognize it. Everything looked familiar but felt foreign, like looking at your childhood home after years away. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys. The coins rattled in my pocket with each step, their sound carrying further than it should have in the open air. As I reached for the door handle, I caught my reflection in the window. Behind me, in the reflection, stood the rest stop. But also behind me, impossible as it was, stood another me. Just standing there by the vending machines, holding a water bottle, watching me watch myself. I didn't turn around. Couldn't turn around. If I turned around and it was really there, or if I turned around and it wasn't, either possibility felt like it would break something fundamental in my understanding of the world. I got in the car, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking space. In the rearview mirror, the rest stop receded into darkness. The other me, if it had ever been there, was lost in the shadows. 5 miles down I-17, my pocket started feeling heavy. I reached in while driving, pulled out the coins. In the dashboard light, I could see them clearly. A quarter with no scratch. A dime, dull and ordinary. A penny, worn smooth by years of handling. Different coins. Normal coins. I should have felt relieved. I tried to feel relieved, but my throat was dry again, painfully dry, and the only thought in my mind was that I needed water, needed to stop. There would be another rest stop soon. There always was. 20 miles later, I saw the sign. Rest area 1 mile. I put on my blinker, took the exit. The rest area squatted beside the highway like something that had given up trying to be presentable. Beige concrete walls stained with years of desert dust. I parked and walked to the vending machines, the coins already in my hand. Fed them into the slot. The machine hummed, dispensed a water bottle, and gave me change. 3 coins rattled into the slot. I didn't need to look to know what they were. The weight of them in my hand told me everything. The quarter with the scratch, the bright dime, the dented penny. I put them in my pocket and walked toward the bathroom, my throat still dry despite the water I'd just bought. The door squealed on rusted hinges. Inside, the fluorescent tubes buzzed and flickered. At the sink, someone was washing their hands, or trying to. The water evaporated as soon as it touched their skin. They looked up into the mirror, and I met my own eyes looking back. Not a reflection. Another me, standing where I had stood, was standing, would stand. Time folded wrong here, showing too many moments at once. I backed out of the bathroom, turned toward the office building. Through the glass door, I could see an attendant behind a counter, lit by the blue glow of security monitors. The same weathered face, the same name tag reading, Coyote Bill's Desert Oasis. He looked up as I approached the door, and his lips moved. Even through the glass, I could hear him clearly. "Help you?" I didn't go in, couldn't go in, because I could see myself already in there, standing at the counter, setting 3 coins down, explaining about the vending machine. And behind that me, another me, watching the security monitors. And behind that one, the coins in my pocket were burning now, actually burning. But when I pulled them out, they were ice cold. The quarter scratch seemed deeper. The dime shone brighter. The penny's dent looked fresh, as if it had just been made. I got back in my car and drove. 50 miles this time before the thirst became unbearable. Before I saw the next rest stop sign. Before I took the exit. The same rest stop. Different location on the map maybe, but the same place. The same beige walls. The same mesquite trees. The same vending machines humming against the north wall. I've stopped looking at the odometer, stopped checking the highway markers. They all lead here anyway. Every exit, every rest stop, every mile of asphalt is just the space between arriving and arriving again. The coins are constant now. I've tried throwing them away, burying them in the desert, leaving them on the counter for someone else. They always return to my pocket. Sometimes I feel them appear, a sudden weight, a brief cold. Sometimes they've always been there, and I can't remember ever not having them. The worst part isn't the repetition, it's the multiplication. Each time I stop, there are more of me. In the bathrooms, at the vending machines, in the office. All slightly out of sync, all performing the same actions at different points in the same eternal loop. We don't acknowledge each other anymore. What would be the point? The attendant, if he's real, if anything here is real, watches it all on his monitors with that same flat expression. Sometimes I think he's the only solid thing in this place, an anchor point that everything else revolves around. Sometimes I think he's just another reflection, another me that's been here so long I've forgotten my own face. The water never satisfies the thirst. The cold never leaves my bones. The coins never lose their weight. I'm writing this at the rest stop on I-17, north of Phoenix, or south of Flagstaff, or both, or neither. Direction doesn't matter when every road leads to the same place. I'm leaving this note in the bathroom, wedged behind the mirror where the footprints always appear. Maybe someone will find it. Maybe I already have. Will find it. Am finding it now. If you stop here and the vending machine gives you 3 coins, a quarter with a scratch, a bright dime, a dented penny, don't put them back. Don't question it. Don't go to the office. Just drive. Drive until your gas tank is empty, until your throat cracks from thirst, until your eyes bleed from staying awake. Drive past every rest stop, no matter how familiar they look. Because once you stop, you never really leave. You just arrive again, and again, and again, each time adding another you to the growing crowd of yourself, all trapped in the same moment, all holding the same 3 coins, all dying of thirst that no amount of water can quench. The fluorescent lights are flickering. In the darkness between the strobes, I can see all of myselves, stretching back through time like an infinite mirror reflection. We're all writing this note. We've all written this note. We're all about to write this note. The coins in my pocket jingle as I stand up. Time to check the vending machines again. Time to wash my hands in water that isn't water. Time to talk to the attendant who might be God or the devil or just another me who's been here longer. Time to continue the loop, because that's all there is now. The loop, the coins, the thirst, and somewhere on I-17, between Phoenix and everywhere else, another car is pulling into a rest stop, driven by someone who just needs a quick break. Just some water, just to stretch their legs. The vending machine is already humming, waiting. The coins are already falling. Story 5. The spotlight in the garden created the same oval pool of light every night, precise as a stage mark. I'd noticed it my second evening at the house. A perfect ellipse on the manicured lawn, its edges sharp against the darkness of the Hollywood Hills. When I stepped toward it from the patio doors, the boundary retreated, maintaining exactly 3 feet between us. Not a dramatic withdrawal, just a subtle drift backward, like someone adjusting their personal space at a cocktail party. I told myself it was an optical illusion. The angle of approach, maybe, or the way the retinal afterimage played tricks in the peripheral darkness. These mid-century houses were full of clever architectural deceptions. Walls of glass that dissolved boundaries, floating staircases that defied gravity. The previous owner, some television producer from the 70s, had probably installed the light as part of an elaborate party trick, long forgotten. The editing job that brought me here was straightforward enough. 3 weeks to cut together a documentary about California modernist architecture. The production company had arranged this house through some connection. Empty, but furnished, they said, between owners. Perfect for concentration. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was editing footage of pristine geometric homes while living in one, surrounded by the same walls of glass, the same impossible cantilevers over the canyon. By the fourth night, I'd developed a routine, work until my eyes burned, usually past midnight. Stand on the patio with a drink, watching that oval of light hold its ground in the garden. Then back inside to the narrow guest bedroom they'd set up as my quarters. Though the master suite stood empty at the far end of the house, its door always ajar exactly 4 inches. The glass doors were everywhere in this place. Interior, exterior, the distinction hardly mattered. They turned the house into a series of reflections. Each room doubled and redoubled until you couldn't tell where the actual space ended and the mirrored world began. During the day, this transparency felt liberating. At night, it became something else entirely. I first noticed the inconsistencies after a week. Small things. A throw pillow on the sectional sofa that appeared on the left arm in reality, but the right arm in the reflection. A coffee table book. Something about Neutra or Schindler that lay closed on the actual table but appeared open in the glass, showing pages I hadn't read. These discrepancies lasted only moments. When I looked again, the reflections had corrected themselves, faithful as mirrors should be. The editing work consumed my days. I'd lose myself in the footage, swooping drone shots of glass boxes perched on stilts, interiors where inside and outside merged into one continuous space. The architects in the interviews spoke of transparency, of honesty in materials, of houses that revealed rather than concealed. Yet here, in my temporary home, transparency had become something unsettling. Every surface showed me something, but I was no longer certain what I was seeing. The old projector sat in the living room like an artifact from another era, a Bell and Howell from the 60s, all chrome and black plastic, aimed at a pull-down screen I hadn't noticed until one night when it descended on its own, smooth and silent as a theater curtain. The mechanical click of the projector starting up sent me rushing from the kitchen, certain I'd triggered something accidentally. But the room was empty. On the screen, grainy Super 8 footage played, a family barbecue, the same patio where I took my nightly drinks. The film stock had that oversaturated quality of old home movies. Everyone's skin too orange, the sky too blue. Normal enough except for the figure at the edge of frame who kept turning toward the camera. My face, but older. Not dramatically aged, just worn in ways I hadn't earned yet. Lines around the eyes, a slight sag to the jaw. This older me would look directly into the lens and make a cutting gesture across his throat, then point toward the garden. The projector clicked off. The screen retracted. When I examined the machine, I found no film threaded through it, no reels at all. I started sleeping poorly. The house made sounds. Settling, I told myself, though steel and glass shouldn't settle like wood. Sometimes I'd wake to find myself standing at the glass doors of the bedroom, looking out at the oval of light which had moved. Not disappeared, just relocated. Sometimes closer to the house, sometimes farther, but always maintaining that perfect elliptical shape. The production company checked in daily by email. Everything fine? Making progress? I sent back affirmatives and rough cuts, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. But the work had become difficult. In the footage I was editing, I began seeing things that shouldn't be there. A shadow in an empty room that moved independently of the camera. A reflection in a window that showed furniture arranged differently than in the actual space. When I scrubbed back through the timeline, these anomalies vanished. One evening, exhausted from staring at screens, I decided to explore the master suite properly. The door, as always, stood open exactly 4 inches. I measured it with my phone. The room beyond was furnished sparingly. A low platform bed, built-in wardrobes, another wall of glass facing the canyon. But the air felt different here, thicker somehow, like swimming through invisible resistance. The closet held clothes that looked familiar, not identical to mine, but similar in style, as if purchased by someone with my taste but more money. The bathroom medicine cabinet contained prescriptions with my name, but dates from 3 years in the future. The pills inside were different colors than any medication I knew. I backed out of the room and the door swung shut behind me. When I tried the handle, it opened easily, but now the room was empty. No furniture, no clothes, just bare floors and walls. I closed it again, opened it, furnished once more, but differently. A woman's clothing in the closet, makeup on the bathroom counter, the prescriptions now bearing a name I didn't recognize. The spotlight in the garden had become my only constant. Each night, there it was, that perfect oval, maintaining its distance. I began to think of it as almost companionable in its predictability. Even when everything else in the house seemed fluid, reflections lying, rooms changing contents, that projector showing impossible films, the light remained, keeping its careful boundary. But then I made a mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was inevitable. I was working late, pushing through the final sequence of the documentary. My eyes burned from the screen glare. The house around me had gone silent. Even the usual settling sounds had stopped, as if the building were holding its breath. I stood to stretch, walked to the glass doors, and saw the oval of light had moved all the way to the patio's edge, almost touching the house. Without thinking, or perhaps thinking too much, I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and went outside. The night air felt solid, like walking through black wool. My flashlight beam seemed to stop after just a few feet, absorbed by darkness that had weight and presence. The oval retreated as always when I approached, but this time I followed it, step by step across the lawn, maintaining that 3-foot gap, like dance partners who never touch. It led me toward the far corner of the garden, where the landscaping gave way to native chaparral, the domesticated space ending abruptly. At the garden's edge, the light stopped retreating. I stopped too, flashlight pointed at the ground, studying that perfect ellipse of brightness. The grass within it looked different, not just illuminated but somehow more real than the grass around it, as if everything outside the oval were a theatrical backdrop, and only this lit circle were genuine. I knelt at the boundary, careful not to cross it. The edge was sharp as a paper cut against the darkness. I reached out my hand, slowly, and touched the line where light met dark. My finger passed through with resistance, like pushing through a membrane. On the other side, my fingertip felt different, warmer, more substantial. I pulled back, and for an instant my finger appeared to lag behind, as if part of it wanted to stay in the light. The oval began to pulse, breathing in and out like something organic. With each pulse, images flashed in the brightness, fragments like single frames spliced into film. The house, but from angles I'd never seen. Myself, sleeping in the guest bedroom, but viewed from inside the mirror, the projector, running backward, pulling light into itself instead of casting it out. And then, clearly, as if it were happening in front of me, myself, older, standing in the garden, creating this oval of light with equipment I didn't recognize. This older me looked haggard, desperate. He was speaking, but no sound reached me. He pointed at the house, then at the spot where I knelt, then made that same cutting gesture across his throat I'd seen in the projection. The light snapped off. Complete darkness rushed in like water filling a void. My flashlight had died, battery intact but producing no light. I stumbled back toward the house, guided only by muscle memory and the faint glow from my laptop screen still visible through the glass doors. Inside, everything appeared normal. The reflections matched reality perfectly. Pillow in its proper place, books closed as they should be. But something had changed. The air felt different, not thicker or thinner, but simply other, as if I were breathing in a space that wasn't quite the same as before. I tried to return to editing, but the footage had changed. The documentary I'd been working on for 2 weeks was gone, replaced by hundreds of hours of surveillance-style video. All of it showed this house, from angles that matched where mirrors and glass doors would be. Day and night, compressed into impossible chronology, sometimes showing the house empty, sometimes showing me working, sometimes showing strangers I didn't recognize living their lives in these rooms, and sometimes showing someone else with my face, older, moving through the house with purpose, adjusting mirrors, cleaning glass, maintaining sight lines, preparing something, waiting. I found myself in one sequence from what must have been yesterday or tomorrow. I was standing at the glass doors, staring out at the garden, but in the footage, I was also outside, staring in, 2 of me, separated by glass that might have been a mirror, or might have been nothing at all. Both versions raised their hand to the glass at the same moment. Both pulled back as if burned. The projector clicked on in the living room. I didn't go to look. I packed quickly, throwing clothes into my bag without folding them. The editing equipment I left. The production company could retrieve it. As I headed for the door, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Behind me, in the glass, the living room was full of people. All of them had my face at different ages, all watching me leave. One of them, the oldest, raised his hand to the glass and mouthed a word that might have been, "Wait," or might have been, "Run." I chose to run. The rental car started immediately, a relief that felt too easy. As I drove down the winding canyon roads, I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see that oval of light following, maintaining its careful distance. But there was only darkness and the occasional sweep of headlights from other cars living their own separate nighttime stories. I found a motel in Van Nuys, one of those places that still took cash and didn't ask questions. The room smelled of old smoke and disinfectant, but it had no glass doors, no projectors, no gardens with geometric lights. Just a bed, a dresser, and a small television that received 3 channels, all of them real. But when I woke the next morning, the clothes in my bag had changed. Still mine, but newer versions, as if I'd replaced my entire wardrobe with identical but upgraded pieces. My laptop, when I opened it, contained the completed documentary, perfectly edited, better than I could have done. The client emails showed nothing but praise for my work, though I couldn't remember finishing it. I drove back to my apartment in Silver Lake, half expecting it to be different too. But it was the same, my furniture where I'd left it, my life apparently undisturbed. Yet sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I catch glimpses of that oval light, in puddles after rain, in the spot a streetlight throws on pavement, in the glow from my laptop screen late at night. I've started seeing my older face in unexpected reflections, store windows, bathroom mirrors, the black screen of my phone before it wakes. He's always trying to tell me something, making gestures I can't interpret, pointing at things just outside the frame. Sometimes he holds up objects I don't recognize but feel I should. Keys to doors I haven't opened, photographs of places I haven't been, pills I haven't taken. The production company paid me in full and offered more work. They were thrilled with the documentary, they said. It had a quality they'd never seen before. The way I'd captured the houses made them seem alive, aware, as if the buildings themselves were watching the audience watch them. They wanted me to edit another project, something about mirror mazes and abandoned amusement parks. I declined. I've researched the house since leaving. The records are contradictory. Built in 1962, or 1958, or 1971. The original owner was a television producer, or an architect, or a psychiatric researcher studying perception and reality. Or it was built specifically for me, though I would have been negative decades old at the time. Each source I find shows different information, all of it plausible, none of it quite right. Sometimes I think about going back. The older version of myself in the reflection seems increasingly urgent, his gestures more frantic. The oval lights I see in peripheral vision pulse with what might be Morse code, or might be a heartbeat, or might be nothing at all. The house is still there. I've driven past it, though I don't stop. In daylight, it looks perfectly normal. A beautiful example of mid-century architecture, all clean lines and transparency. But I know what waits in the garden at night, that perfect oval of light, maintaining its distance, patient as a trap or a door or a mirror, showing not what is, but what will be. I know that somewhere in that house, a projector holds film of my future, and glass doors reflect rooms I haven't entered yet, and a version of myself is preparing something I'm not ready to understand. The editing work I do now is simple, corporate stuff. Nothing with houses, nothing with glass. Nothing that reflects or projects or maintains careful boundaries. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm working alone and the screen is the only light, I see that oval behind me in the monitor's black bezels. Getting closer. Or maybe I'm moving toward it. The distance remains constant, 3 feet exactly, but I can no longer tell who's approaching whom. I've started leaving lights on when I sleep. Not because I'm afraid of the dark, but because I'm afraid of the patterns light makes. Perfect ovals, geometric precision, boundaries that retreat when approached but never truly leave. The older version of myself has stopped appearing in reflections. I tell myself this is good, that whatever he was warning me about has passed. But sometimes I wonder if he's stopped appearing because he's no longer older. If I've aged into him, approached that future one day at a time until there's no difference left to see. Last week, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was my name and a date 3 years from now. The body contained only coordinates, latitude and longitude that, when I checked, despite myself, led to that house in the hills. The email disappeared from my inbox while I was looking at it, but the coordinates remain in my memory, precise as that oval of light. I won't go back. I tell myself this every day, a mantra against curiosity. But I've started noticing things. My clothes look newer. My reflection sometimes precedes my movements by a fraction of a second, and last night I could swear I heard the click and whir of a projector starting up, though I own no such device. The house is waiting. The light maintains its distance. And somewhere, in glass or film or the space between what's real and what's reflected, a version of me is still trying to deliver a message I'm terrified to receive. 3 feet exactly. That's all that stands between me and understanding. I maintain the gap, for now, but the distance is getting harder to judge. Story 6. The on-air light blinked red, and the voices came again. They whispered my surname through the monitor speakers. A dozen mouths shaping the syllables wrong, each accent pulling the name in different directions until it became something foreign, something that shouldn't exist. I yanked the headphones off and checked the board. All faders down. No inputs active. The transmitter wheezed in its cabinet like something trying to breathe through broken ribs. I'd been covering the overnight shift at KXNM for 3 weeks, and the station had been wrong from the start. Not broken. Wrong. The way a familiar room feels wrong when the furniture has been moved an inch in every direction. The community radio station squatted on a mesa 20 miles outside Taos. A cinder block cube painted the color of dried blood. Desert stretched in every direction, punctuated by sage and the occasional rusted fence post. At night, with no moon, the darkness pressed against the windows like it had weight. I tested the cables again, running my fingers along the XLR connections, checking for loose grounds. The whispers only came when I breathed deep near the microphone, as if my lungs triggered something in the electromagnetic field. The engineer who trained me hadn't mentioned this. He'd shown me the board, the automation system, the emergency protocols, then left for Albuquerque without looking back. His hands had shaken the entire time. The transmitter failed every third night, usually around 2 a.m. I'd have to climb the narrow stairs to the equipment room and reset the breakers. The room smelled of ozone and something else, something organic and sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun. The transmitter itself ran hot, its metal casing covered in handprints that appeared in the dust no matter how often I wiped them clean. In Studio B, I found the tape marking on the floor during my second week. Silver duct tape formed a perfect square where a chair should have been, but the room held no furniture except a disconnected mixing board pushed against the wall. The tape looked fresh, edges sharp and clean. When I peeled up a corner, the concrete underneath was stained dark, as if something had soaked into the foundation itself. The station logs went back 40 years, handwritten in dozens of different scripts. I read them during the dead hours between 3 and 5 a.m., when even the emergency scanner stayed quiet. Every overnight DJ mentioned the transmitter problems. Some noted technical difficulties or atmospheric interference. One entry from 1987 just said, "They know I'm here," repeated 17 times down the margin. I started keeping my own log. Tuesday, VU meters dancing without input, needles swinging in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Wednesday, phone rang 6 times, no one on the line, just the sound of wind through a very small space. Thursday, found a second tape square in Studio B, 3 feet from the first. Friday, the whispers learned my first name. The automation system played pre-recorded shows from 2 to 6 a.m. syndicated jazz programs, and BBC News. But sometimes the files corrupted. Instead of music, the speakers would emit a low drone that made my teeth ache. Once, for 17 minutes, it broadcast the sound of someone typing on a keyboard, each keystroke deliberate and slow. I checked the computer. Nothing was running except the playout software. During my third week, things accelerated. The on-AR light started blinking when the studio was empty. I'd be in the break room making coffee, and through the window I'd see that red glow pulsing like a heartbeat. When I rushed back, the chair would be warm, the microphone adjusted to a height I never used. I installed a webcam, aimed it at the studio door. The footage showed nothing unusual until I played it back at quarter speed. Then I saw them. Shadows that moved independent of any light source, flowing under the door like liquid. They'd pool in front of the console for minutes at a time before dissipating. The whispers evolved. Instead of just my name, they started saying other things. Coordinates, dates, sometimes just numbers in sequence. 7, 19, 7, 19. Always in those wrong accents, like mouths that had never shaped English before, were trying to communicate something urgent. I researched the station's history at the Taos Library. KXNM had been built on land purchased from the state in 1979. Before that, the records got murky. One newspaper mentioned a radio research facility from the 1950s, something about studying atmospheric propagation. Another clipping, water-damaged and barely legible, described unexplained broadcasts received by ham radio operators in the area, voices speaking languages that linguists couldn't identify. The breaking point came at 3:06 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was alone, as always, reading weather reports on air. The clock on the wall ticked forward normally until it hit 3:06, then ran backward for 2 seconds, 3:05, 3:04, before resuming. The VU meters spiked into the red. Through the headphones, I heard my own voice reading the weather, but wrong. The words were mine. The intonation was mine. But underneath ran a second track, that same chorus of whispers, synchronized now, speaking in unison. I stopped reading. My voice on the monitors continued for another 10 seconds before cutting to dead air. The transmitter alarm screamed. I climbed to the equipment room, my footsteps echoing wrong in the stairwell. Too many echoes, as if the space was larger than it should be. The transmitter glowed cherry red, heat waves distorting the air. On its side, in the dust, new handprints had appeared. They were small, child-sized, but the fingers were too long, with too many joints. I reset the breakers and fled back to the studio. The chair was turned to face the wall. On the seat was a cassette tape, unlabeled, still warm to the touch. I shouldn't have played it. But at 4 a.m., alone in the desert with only the whispers for company, judgment fails. The tape contained 30 minutes of silence, then a voice. My voice, reading names and addresses I didn't recognize. Then coordinates. Then the voice changed, became older, more tired. It was still me, but wrong. Me from someone else. It said, Day 913. They're teaching me their language now. The frequency is everything. When you breathe near the microphone, you complete the circuit. Stop breathing. Stop broadcasting. They think you're answering. I ejected the tape. My hands shook as I locked it in the bottom drawer of the desk. But when I returned from the bathroom, it was back in the player, rewound to the beginning. The sun rose at 6:47 a.m., painting the desert the color of dried blood. The morning DJ arrived at 7, cheerful and oblivious. She noticed nothing wrong, just patted my shoulder and told me I looked tired. I drove home on autopilot, the whispers following me in the static between radio stations. I submitted my resignation that afternoon, effective immediately. The station manager didn't argue, just nodded like he'd been expecting it. He handed me my final paycheck without making eye contact. But the dreams started that night. In them, I'm back in Studio B, standing in the tape square. The room is full of people, all wearing headphones, all whispering in unison. Their mouths move wrong, like they're speaking backward. The clock on the wall runs in reverse. And in the center of the room, Where the second tape square should be, there's a microphone. When I wake, I can still hear them. In the white noise of the air conditioner, in the static of the television, in the space between heartbeats. They're still broadcasting, still trying to complete the circuit. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself whispering back. The coordinates they gave me point to a spot in the desert 17 miles from the station. I've driven past it 6 times but never stopped. There's nothing there, just sage and sand and a depression in the earth that looks too regular to be natural. Sometimes I see tire tracks leading to it, though there's no road. Last week I got a call from the station manager. The new overnight DJ had quit after 2 shifts. He wanted to know if I'd consider coming back just temporarily. The pay would be double. I told him no, but my voice sounded wrong through the phone, accented in a way I'd never spoken before. The whispers are getting louder. They know where I live now. The other night, I woke to find my laptop open, the screen showing a waveform in an audio editor I'd never installed. The waveform spelled out words when viewed from the right angle. The frequency remembers. I've started recording myself sleeping, trying to catch whatever happens in those lost hours between 3:04 and 3:06. The recordings show nothing unusual, except for one thing. Sometimes, for just a frame or two, there's someone else in the room. They're standing by the bed, leaning down toward the microphone on my nightstand. Their face is always turned away, but their posture is familiar. It's me. I'm sure of it. Me from the tape. Me from 913 days in the future, still broadcasting, still completing the circuit I started that first night when I breathed too deep near the microphone. The station is still there, squatting on its mesa, sending its signal into the desert night. Sometimes I tune in from home, listening through the static. The overnight DJ reads weather reports and plays jazz, oblivious to the whispers underneath. But I hear them. They're saying new names now, learning new accents. The circuit is growing. I've stopped answering my phone. Every call sounds like static shaped into words. My laptop's microphone picks up broadcasts from frequencies that shouldn't exist. The neighbors complain about radio interference, voices bleeding through their baby monitors and smart speakers. Tomorrow, I'm driving back to the coordinates. Not because I want to, but because the dreams are getting specific. In them, I'm digging in that depression in the desert, my hands bloody and raw. There's something buried there, something that needs to be found. Or maybe something that needs to stay buried. The whispers won't tell me which. The frequency is everything. The circuit must be completed, or broken. I no longer know which I'm supposed to choose. All I know is that somewhere, in a time that hasn't happened yet, I'm still in that studio, still breathing too close to the microphone, still teaching them how to shape their voices into something almost human. The on-air light never goes off now. Even here, hundreds of miles away, I can see its red glow reflecting off surfaces that shouldn't catch light. My coffee mug, my windshield, the inside of my eyelids when I try to sleep. They're learning so fast. Yesterday, one of them managed to say my full name correctly, middle name and all. It sounded exactly like my mother's voice, if she had lived long enough to develop an accent from a place that doesn't exist. The tape in the bottom drawer of my desk at home is the same one I locked in the station 3 months ago. I've never retrieved it, but there it is, waiting. Sometimes it plays itself in the middle of the night, my future voice getting more desperate with each listening. Day 913 was just the beginning. The latest recording is from day 2004. I'm running out of time, or maybe I have too much of it, stretching in both directions like the sound waves that carry the whispers from whenever they originate. The frequency doesn't care about linear chronology. It just needs a voice, a breath, a circuit to complete itself through. The desert remembers everything. Every broadcast, every whisper, every moment when the clock ran backward. It's all still there, encoded in the electromagnetic spectrum, waiting for the right receiver to decode it. And I was that receiver, breathing too deep, completing circuits I didn't know existed. Tomorrow I'll drive to those coordinates. I'll dig in that depression. I'll find whatever is buried there, transmitter, bones, or something else entirely, and maybe then the whispers will stop. Or maybe I'll finally understand what they've been trying to tell me all along. The frequency is everything. The circuit must close. Time is just another wavelength, and we're all just voices in the static, trying to be heard by someone who knows how to listen. The on-AR light is blinking in my peripheral vision now, even though there's no studio here. Just my apartment, my insomnia, and the certain knowledge that somewhere, somewhen, I'm still broadcasting, still breathing too deep, still learning their language, still becoming something that whispers in accents that shouldn't exist. Story 7. The GPS had been acting strange for the past 20 miles, but I'd driven through rural Vermont enough times to trust the road more than the technology. That's how I found myself approaching the covered bridge on Hollow Creek Road, just as dawn was breaking through the autumn mist. I'd left Burlington at 4 a.m., hoping to beat the leaf peeper traffic on my way to a property viewing in Woodstock. The realtor had insisted on an early meeting, something about the seller being particular about showing times. The coffee in my travel mug had gone cold an hour ago, and the radio kept cutting to static every few minutes, leaving me alone with the sound of tires on frost-touched asphalt. The bridge appeared suddenly around a bend, its weathered red exterior emerging from the fog like something half-remembered from a dream. A sign beside the entrance read, Hollow Creek Bridge, 1887, though the numbers seemed to shift in my peripheral vision. I slowed the car, something in my chest tightening as I approached the dark mouth of the structure. I turned off the engine just before entering, wanting to hear the creek below, an old habit from childhood trips with my grandfather, who taught me to always listen to water before crossing it. The silence that greeted me was absolute. No creek burble, no morning birds, not even the settling of old wood. Just a thick, cotton-wrapped quiet that made my ears ring. That's when I noticed the yield signs. They were mounted on both sides of the entrance, but someone had twisted them inward, pressing them flat against the wooden beams as if trying to hide them. The metal was bent at odd angles, and rust-brown stains spread from where nails had been driven through the signs into the wood. Fresh nails by the look of them. The hammer marks were still bright in the old timber. I sat there, engine off, wondering who would do such a thing and why. The rational part of my brain offered explanations. Vandals, drunk teenagers, some local prank. But something about the deliberate way they'd been turned inward, facing the bridge's interior rather than outward to warn approaching traffic, made my skin prickle. Then I heard it, the sound of tires on wooden planks, that distinctive rumble thump of rubber meeting old boards. But the sound was coming from behind me, inside the bridge I hadn't yet entered. The echo bounced off the covered walls, seeming to grow louder as it approached the entrance where I sat frozen. I turned in my seat, craning to look through the rear window. The bridge behind me was empty, its other end barely visible as a pale square of morning light. Yet the sound continued, closer now, the phantom vehicle perhaps 30 feet away, 20, 10. Silence again. My hands trembled as I turned the key, the engine catching with a relieved rumble. I eased forward into the bridge, my headlights cutting through the darkness. The beams caught the turned-in yield signs, their reflective surfaces throwing light in unexpected directions. That's when I saw it, or thought I saw it. The light bouncing off the signs created patterns on the opposite wall, lines of brightness that seemed random at first, but as I crept forward, they began to form shapes. Letters. From a certain angle, sitting just right in the driver's seat, the reflected light spelled out, David. My name. I stopped breathing, adjusted my position slightly. The letters dissolved into meaningless light scratches, moved back. There it was again. David, clear as newspaper print, written in light across the old wooden wall. The rational explanation came immediately. Pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist, like seeing faces in clouds or hearing voices in white noise. The light could form any number of patterns that might look like letters. The fact that they spelled my name was just coincidence, my brain forcing meaning onto chaos. But I'd never told anyone I was taking this route. I'd chosen it on a whim, avoiding the main highway. How could anyone have known to arrange this elaborate prank if that's what it was? I pressed the accelerator, wanting to be through and done with this. The bridge was maybe 100 feet long, but it seemed to stretch as I drove, the exit growing no closer despite my movement. My speedometer read 15 miles per hour, a reasonable speed for such a structure, but the walls crept by as if I were barely moving. The sound returned, tires on wood, from behind again, though now I was inside the bridge, this time accompanied by the low growl of an engine, not modern and refined, but something older, throatier. In my rearview mirror, darkness. But the sound grew closer, and I swear I could feel the vibration through my seat. I pushed harder on the gas. 20 miles per hour, 25. Too fast for safety on the old boards, but panic was overriding caution. The exit rushed toward me now, and I burst through into gray morning light, tires squealing as they hit asphalt again. I pulled over immediately, hands shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. In the mirror, the bridge sat quiet and innocent, morning fog drifting through its dark interior. No following vehicle emerged. My phone, which had been silent in the cup holder, suddenly came alive with notifications. The GPS refreshed, and for a few unsettling minutes, it showed my car icon traveling the wrong direction on the road. Not just wrong, but on a road that didn't exist on the map. A thin gray line parallel to Hollow Creek Road, labeled only with numbers: 43, 7,191 degrees north, 72, 5,195 degrees west. I grabbed my phone to screenshot the anomaly, but the image refreshed, showing me properly positioned on the correct road, facing the right direction. The gray line was gone. When I checked my phone's history, there was no record of the alternate route. The property viewing was a blur. The realtor, a thin woman who smiled too much, kept asking if I was feeling all right. I must have seemed distracted because I was. I kept thinking about the bridge, about the sounds, about my name in light. When she showed me the master bedroom, she mentioned the previous owner had left suddenly, something about a family emergency. But the way she said it suggested there was more to the story. The drive back should have been simple. I'd take the main highway, avoid Hollow Creek Road entirely. But 3 hours later, as afternoon sun slanted through the trees, I found myself approaching that same bend, that same bridge emerging from the tree line. I was certain I'd taken Route 100. My GPS confirmed it, yet here I was. This time I didn't stop before entering. I drove through at a steady pace, eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look at the twisted yield signs or the walls where light might spell names. But I couldn't help noticing new details. Fresh scratch marks on the wooden posts, as if someone had clawed at them. A dark stain on the floorboards that looked too fresh to be old oil. The sound of breathing that wasn't quite wind through the boards. When I emerged, my GPS showed that impossible gray road again, longer this time. It ran parallel to reality for nearly a mile before my location snapped back to the correct position. I pulled over and called the realtor, trying to sound casual as I asked about the bridge. Her silence lasted too long. Then, carefully, she said she wasn't sure what bridge I meant. There was no covered bridge on the route between Burlington and Woodstock. Hadn't been for years. The old Hollow Creek Bridge had burned in 1953. I drove back to Burlington in a fog of disbelief, taking photos of every road sign, every landmark, creating a trail of evidence that I'd been where I'd been. But when I reviewed them later, the images showed different roads, different routes. No bridge, no Hollow Creek Road. Even my car's dash cam, which I checked with shaking fingers, showed only an uninterrupted drive on Route 100. That was 3 days ago. Since then, I've researched obsessively. There was indeed a Hollow Creek Bridge that burned in 1953. 3 people died when their car became trapped inside during the fire, a family returning from a property viewing in Woodstock. The father's name was David. But there's also a Hollow Creek Bridge standing today. I've driven through it 4 times now, each time swearing I won't go back, each time finding myself on that road regardless of which route I choose. The yield signs are turned further inward with each pass. The scratches on the posts look more desperate. And yesterday, when the light hit just right, it didn't just spell my name. It spelled Y-I-E-L-D. I've started seeing that gray road on my GPS even when I'm not driving. It appears on Google Maps for seconds at a time, a ghost highway that runs parallel to every route I know. Sometimes I see cars on it, tiny icons moving in the wrong direction. Sometimes one of them stops at a bridge that isn't there. The realtor called this morning. She said the property in Woodstock is perfect for me, that the seller is eager to close, that I should come see it again. Her voice sounded different though, older, rougher, like someone who'd been breathing smoke. When I asked her about the bridge, she laughed, and I heard tires on wood in the background. I'm writing this from my apartment in Burlington. It's 3 a.m. In 1 hour, I'm supposed to leave for another viewing. I've planned a different route, one that takes me north through Montpelier, nowhere near Hollow Creek Road. I've checked it a dozen times, but I can see my GPS from here, and every few minutes that gray line appears, growing longer, reaching toward every possible path. My coffee's gone cold. The radio keeps cutting to static, and if I listen carefully, I can hear it. Tires on old wood getting closer, though I'm 3 stories up in a building made of brick and steel. The sound is inside now, inside my walls, inside my head. It's coming from behind, always from behind, no matter which way I turn. I know what happened to the first David. He saw the signs turned inward too. He heard the phantom car. He saw his name in light, and eventually, he took that gray road, the one that runs parallel to reality, the one that leads to a bridge that burned and didn't burn, where yield signs face inward because it's not about yielding to traffic, it's about yielding to the road itself. The GPS just refreshed. Every route leads to Hollow Creek now. Every road becomes that road. The gray line isn't parallel anymore. It's overlapping, replacing, consuming the real highways pixel by pixel. And in the corner of the screen, barely visible, a small car icon sits motionless on a bridge, waiting. It's 3:47 a.m. Time to go. The realtor insists the seller won't wait much longer. She says he's been trying to leave for years, but someone needs to take his place first. Someone who's already driven the gray road. Someone who's already seen their name in light. I can hear my car engine running in the parking lot below, though my keys are still on the kitchen counter. The sound echoes wrong, like it's coming through a wooden tunnel, like it's coming from behind. I understand now why the yield signs were turned inward. They're not hiding from approaching traffic. They're trying to warn whoever's already inside. The bridge isn't just on Hollow Creek Road. The bridge is Hollow Creek Road, and every road I take now leads back to it, through it, into it. The gray line on my GPS isn't showing an alternate route. It's showing where I've always been driving, even when I thought I was somewhere else. My name isn't spelled in light on those walls. It's carved into them, has been since 1953, waiting for me to come close enough to read it. Waiting for me to understand that some bridges don't just cross water. They cross between what is and what isn't, what was and what shouldn't be. And once you've driven through, even once, you never really leave. You just keep approaching from different angles, seeing new details, understanding more each time, until you realize the terrible truth. The phantom car you hear isn't following you. It's you. Always has been you. Echoing through time, following yourself through a bridge that burned but didn't burn, where the yield signs face inward because the only thing you're meant to yield to is the inevitable truth that you've always been here, driving these wooden planks, listening to yourself approach from behind. The coffee's cold, the radio's static, the GPS shows nothing but gray lines now, a spiderweb of roads that don't exist with a bridge at every intersection. Time to go. The seller's waiting. He's been waiting since 1953. And I know, I've kept him waiting long enough. Story 8. The canyon walls pressed in like the ribs of some ancient beast, striations of red sandstone marking millennia of patient erosion. I'd chosen this particular slot canyon near Escalante because the guidebook promised solitude. No permits required, rarely visited, technically challenging enough to discourage casual hikers. What the guidebook hadn't mentioned was how the narrow passages would swallow sound, twist it, and spit it back changed. I noticed the wrongness with my shadow first. The sun blazed directly overhead, that brutal Utah noon that turns the rock into an oven, and when I stopped to photograph the serpentine walls above, my shadow pooled at my feet, except in the viewfinder, where it lagged 2 steps behind, a dark twin refusing to keep pace. I lowered the camera, looked down. Shadow beneath me, raised it again. Shadow behind. The displacement made my stomach turn with a peculiar vertigo, like missing a step in the dark. The canyon narrowed ahead, walls converging until I had to turn sideways and shuffle through, my pack scraping against sandstone worn smooth by flash floods. This deep, the sky became a jagged blue ribbon overhead, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breathing echoed strangely in the confined space, each exhalation returning with an unfamiliar cadence. "Anyone there?" I called out, partly to test the acoustics, partly because the silence had grown too dense, too expectant. The echo came back wrong, not just delayed or distorted, but carrying an extra syllable I hadn't spoken, a whispered addition that sounded like waiting. My rational mind insisted it was just the canyon's geometry playing tricks, sound waves bouncing off irregular surfaces, but my skin prickled with primitive warning. I pushed deeper into the slot. The walls here bore strange markings, not the ancient petroglyphs I'd hoped to find, but something more recent yet somehow more unsettling. Scratches that might have been made by fingernails, if fingernails could score sandstone. They formed no pattern I could discern, just desperate, chaotic gouges that made my own fingers ache in sympathy. The water bottle clipped to my carabiner caught my attention when droplets splashed my leg. I unclipped it, puzzled. The cap was secure, the bottle itself intact. Yet when I held it up to the thin shaft of light penetrating from above, I could see moisture beading the inside surface, and worse, fine grains of sand stuck to the interior walls. Sand that couldn't have gotten inside without opening it. Sand that seemed to shift and swirl in patterns that hurt to follow with my eyes. My compass, when I checked it, sent a spike of genuine fear through my chest. The needle didn't point north, it pointed straight down, quivering as if magnetized to something beneath the canyon floor. I tapped the case, shook it, but the needle remained fixed in its impossible orientation for several long seconds, before suddenly snapping back to north with such violence that it spun 3 full rotations. The canyon branched ahead. The left passage opened slightly, promising easier travel. The right passage narrowed to a crack barely wide enough for a human body. Logic dictated left, but something about the right passage pulled at me. Not quite a sound, not quite a smell, but a sensation like pressure changes before a storm. I chose right, had to remove my pack and push it ahead of me as I squeezed through. The rock here felt different, almost warm to the touch despite being sheltered from the sun. My headlamp, when I switched it on, revealed walls that seemed to pulse with their own subtle luminescence. Probably some mineral deposit, I told myself, though I'd never seen anything quite like it in 15 years of desert hiking. Halfway through the squeeze, my pack stopped moving. I pushed harder, but it wouldn't budge, as if someone on the other side was holding it. My breathing quickened, fogging in the suddenly cold air. Then, just as abruptly, the resistance vanished, and I tumbled through into a wider chamber. The chamber shouldn't have existed. I'd studied the topographical maps, traced this canyon system dozens of times. This space, roughly circular and maybe 20 feet across, appeared on no survey. The walls rose smooth and unbroken toward a ceiling lost in shadow. And the floor was covered in footprints. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all bare feet of different sizes, overlapping in chaotic patterns. Some looked fresh, edges sharp in the sandy floor. Others had been partially filled by wind-blown grit, but wind couldn't reach this deep into the canyon. Nothing could, except I knelt beside one particularly clear print. The toes were too long, the arch too high. Human-like but wrong in ways that made my eyes water trying to process the geometry. As I watched, the print began to fill itself in, sand flowing upward against gravity, erasing the evidence grain by grain. My water bottle was wet again. This time when I examined it, I found my own name etched in the condensation inside, except backwards, as if written from within. The sand grains had arranged themselves into symbols that might have been letters in no alphabet I recognized. I needed to leave. Now. But when I turned back to the squeeze passage, it had changed. Not blocked, not collapsed, but different. The angle's wrong, the width inconsistent with what I'd just crawled through. I tried anyway, got my shoulders wedged tight before backing out, skin scraped raw. The only way was forward, through another passage I hadn't noticed before. This one descended at a steep angle, the floor slick with moisture that couldn't exist in this desert climate. My boots found no purchase, and I half slid, half fell into darkness, my headlamp beam swallowed by rock that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The passage opened into another chamber, this one occupied. Not by a person. I would have been relieved to find another hiker, no matter how they'd gotten here. What stood in the center of the space defied immediate classification. It might have been a formation of mineralized wood, twisted into a vaguely humanoid shape. It might have been erosion-carved sandstone that happened to suggest a figure. But it moved, not obviously, not quickly, but with the subtle patience of growth rings forming in trees. I circled it, keeping my distance, trying to find the angle that would resolve it into something mundane. But every perspective offered new impossibilities. From one side, it seemed to have too many joints. From another, its surface appeared to breathe. And always, it seemed to be watching me without eyes. My compass needle now spun continuously, a blur of motion that made the case warm to the touch. My shadow, when I checked it in my headlamp's beam, had multiplied. 3, 4, 5 versions of myself cast in different directions, though I had only one light source. The thing in the center of the chamber made a sound. Not quite voice, not quite wind, but something between that formed almost words. It might have been saying my name. It might have been saying join. It might have been the sound of stone eroding over centuries, compressed into seconds. I ran. Not back the way I'd come. That passage had sealed itself with a grinding noise I felt in my teeth, but through yet another opening that hadn't existed moments before. The canyon was reshaping itself around me, walls flowing like water, passages opening and closing with organic fluidity. My pursuit, because I was definitely being pursued now, made no sound I could hear, but I felt it in the changing air pressure, in the way my shadow began to lag further and further behind, until I could see it at the edge of my vision, moving independently, reaching for holds I hadn't touched. The water bottle at my hip had filled itself with something that wasn't water. Too thick, too dark, moving with purpose inside the plastic. I unclipped it, threw it behind me, heard it burst with a wet sound that might have been laughter. Above, the ribbon of sky had changed color, not the blue of afternoon or the orange of sunset, but a shade that had no name, that made my brain skip like a scratched record trying to process it. Stars were visible in that impossible sky, but they formed no constellations I knew, and they moved, crawling across the heavens like insects. I burst from the canyon into blazing sunlight, so suddenly that I stumbled and fell, scraping palms on rough stone. When I looked back, the slot canyon entrance was there, ordinary and narrow, exactly as I'd entered it hours ago, or minutes ago. My watch had stopped, the digital display showing symbols that weren't numbers. I drove back to Escalante in a haze, stopped at the visitor center to report. What? That I'd found an unmapped chamber, that shadows could move independently of their sources. The ranger I spoke to pulled out the same topographical map I'd studied, traced the canyon system with her finger. She paused, frowning, at a section near where I'd been. There was something marked there I hadn't seen before. Or had I? My memory felt suddenly uncertain. She said something about areas that weren't recommended for solo hiking, about magnetic anomalies that could affect navigation equipment, about how every few years someone would come back from that particular canyon system with stories that didn't quite make sense. She mentioned a name then, casual but watching my reaction, the name of someone who'd gone missing in that area 3 years ago. Someone whose water bottle had been found but nothing else. Someone with my exact name. I thanked her and left quickly, but not before she called after me with words that still echo. She was glad I made it back out. Not everyone did. And had I noticed anything unusual about my shadow? Because from where she stood, it seemed to be facing the wrong direction, like it was watching something behind me that wasn't there. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't venture into slot canyons. I've replaced my compass 3 times because they keep pointing to coordinates that don't exist on any map. And sometimes when the light hits just right, I count my shadows. There are always too many. The water bottle I threw away in the canyon. I found it in my pack when I got home, dry on the outside, filled with sand that spells out messages when I shake it. Messages that tell me about the next solo hiker who'll enter that canyon, someone with my name who hasn't been born yet, or who died 3 years ago, or who exists in the space between seconds where shadows live independently of their sources. I've stopped trying to understand whether what happened was real or some altitude-induced psychosis, whether the canyon actually reshaped itself, or I simply got lost in my own mind. The distinction seems less important now than the fact that sometimes, late at night, I can feel that chamber calling to me, a pull like magnetism in my bones, promising answers to questions I'm afraid to ask. The thing in the center of that impossible room is still waiting. I know because my shadow knows, and these days, my shadow and I don't always agree on where we've been or where we're going. It wants to return. It whispers about the peace of becoming something that exists outside the ordinary flow of time, about the freedom of walls that breathe and passages that open only when you're not quite human anymore. I resist, but resistance takes effort, and I'm tired, so tired. And sometimes when I look at maps of Utah, I see new canyons that weren't there before, branching systems that spell out invitations in topographical lines, promising that this time, if I go back, I'll understand what my shadow understood all along. The next solo hiker who finds that canyon might be me, or might have been me. Time doesn't work right there, and neither do the rules that say a person can't meet themselves coming back from a hike they haven't taken yet. I check weather reports obsessively now, waiting for the perfect conditions, high sun, no wind, the kind of day when shadows should fall directly beneath their owners. Those are the days when the wrongness would be most obvious, when another hiker might notice their shadow refusing to behave, might call out to test the echo, and hear that extra syllable that means something is listening, has always been listening, will always be listening in the space between stone and sky where the ordinary world thins enough to show what lies beneath. The maps keep changing. The canyon keeps calling. And one day, I know I'll answer, because my shadow has already gone ahead to wait for me in that chamber where things that might once have been human stand patient as stone, becoming something else, something more, something that understands why compasses point down and water flows upward and echoes add words that were never spoken. Until then, I warn other hikers about that particular canyon system. I tell them about the magnetic anomalies, the confusing passages, the way sound behaves strangely in the narrow slots. I don't tell them about the shadows or the chambers that shouldn't exist, or the thing in the center that watches without eyes. They wouldn't believe me anyway. But sometimes, someone comes back from a solo hike with that particular look. Wide eyes, scraped hands, compass spinning wildly, and I know they found it too. We don't talk about it directly. We just nod at each other with the understanding of those who've seen the impossible and chosen, for now, to keep walking in the world where shadows mostly obey and echoes mostly repeat what we say. For now. Story 9. The oil pump's rhythm hadn't changed in 3 hours. I knew because I'd been watching it from my car, counting each dip and rise against the dying light that painted the Texas desert in shades of rust and shadow. The ghost town outside Marfa had no name on any map I'd found, just a cluster of buildings that Google Earth showed as pixelated squares, their resolution somehow always worse than the surrounding desert. I'd come here following a shorthand note I'd found in my father's effects after he died. Station 1470 AM, coordinates, they know. The coordinates led me here. The station frequency when I'd tried it back in Austin gave only static. But now, parked beside that hypnotic oil pump with its metronomic persistence, the AM band crackled differently. The pump's arm descended again, and I noticed the tumbleweed beside it remained perfectly still, despite the mechanism's continued motion. No wind. The laws of physics suggested the pump should have stopped too, but there it went, drawing from wells that had supposedly run dry in the 70s. The abandoned gas station across the dirt road still had glass in its windows. A miracle in a place like this. The open sign hung crooked behind dusty panes, its neon tubing dark and broken. I stepped out of my car, and the silence hit me like a physical presence. Not the romantic silence of nature, but something dense and waiting. My footsteps on the packed earth sounded too loud, each crunch of gravel carrying further than it should. Elm Street, I said aloud, reading the barely visible street sign. The words felt strange in my mouth, too modern for this place that time had forgotten. The open sign flickered once, a brief spark of electricity in dead neon. I stopped walking. The rational part of my brain offered explanations. Residual charge in a capacitor, vibrations from my footsteps, a trick of the fading light. But my skin had already decided on fear, raising every hair along my arms despite the desert heat. Inside the station, visible through the window, merchandise still lined the shelves, dust-covered but intact. Coca-Cola bottles with logos from the 60s, packages of cigarettes behind the counter, brands I didn't recognize. I pushed the door, expecting resistance, but it swung open on silent hinges that should have screamed with rust. The dust on the floor told a story. Boot prints, large ones, maybe size 12 or 13. They came in from the door, made it halfway to the counter, then executed a tight turn. Not a casual turn, but sharp, decisive. Like someone had suddenly remembered something urgent or seen something that changed their mind. The prints led back out, and I could see where they'd accelerated, the heel marks deeper, the stride longer. I followed the prints backward, trying to see what they'd seen. From their position at the turn, the view would have been of the back wall, where a calendar hung showing April 1971. Below it, a doorway led to what might have been a storage room or office, dark beyond the threshold. The AM radio in my pocket crackled. I'd brought a portable unit, an old analog model I'd found at a pawn shop. The digital ones wouldn't even acknowledge the frequency existed. I turned the volume up, and through the static came a voice, barely audible. Blue sedan, Texas plates ending in 347. Respond if you're receiving. My car was blue. My plates ended in 347. I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on that dark doorway at the rear of the station. The voice on the radio continued, clearer now. Subject has entered the station. Maintain visual. Do not approach until... Static swallowed the rest. Outside, the oil pump continued its relentless rhythm. The sun had dropped below the horizon, leaving only a bruised afterglow. My car sat exactly where I'd left it, but something felt different. The angle was wrong, or maybe the distance. I couldn't pin it down, but my feet knew the number of steps from the station door to my driver's seat, and the count was off by 3. I got in and locked the doors, a futile gesture in a place with no people, but the click of the lock settling made me feel marginally better. The radio in my pocket had gone silent, but the car's stereo showed 1470 AM was now in range. I turned it on. Advise all units. The blue sedan is now mobile. Driver appears agitated. Historical pattern suggests he'll proceed to the motel. Do not intercept. Repeat, do not intercept. Let the sequence complete itself. I wasn't driving. The car was still in park, engine off. The voice continued with clinical detachment. Subject typically arrives between 6:17 and 6:23 p.m. Current time is 6:19. We're within parameters. My phone showed 6:19 p.m. Movement in the rearview mirror caught my eye. A figure stood beside the oil pump, tall and motionless. The dying light made it impossible to see features, just a silhouette that shouldn't have been there. I turned around. Nothing. The pump continued its motion, alone. The radio crackled. Visual distortion is normal at this stage. Subject may experience temporal displacement. false memories, or perception of observers. Document everything. I started the engine, needing to move, to break whatever pattern they thought I was following. But as I pulled onto the main road, I realized I didn't know which way I'd come from. Both directions looked identical, stretching into darkness. The mountains that should have been visible to the north were gone, or maybe they'd never been there. The motel appeared in my headlights before I remembered driving to it. A classic motor lodge, L-shaped, with doors that faced the parking lot. Half the letters in its neon sign still worked. MTL. The office window glowed with warm yellow light, and through it, I could see someone behind the desk. The first person I'd seen since arriving. I parked and approached the office. Through the glass door, the clerk was visible in profile, an older man reading a newspaper. He didn't look up as I approached, didn't react to the bell that rang when I opened the door. "I need a room," I said. He continued reading. The newspaper's date was visible. April 15th, 1971. "Excuse me?" Finally, he looked up, but not at me. His gaze fixed somewhere past my left shoulder. "Room's already paid for. Number 7. Keys on the counter." I looked where he indicated. A key with a plastic tag lay there, the number 7 worn but visible. I picked it up, and the metal was warm, as if someone had just been holding it. "Who paid for it?" He was already back to his newspaper, but I caught his response. "You did. You always do." The walk to room 7 felt longer than it should have. The door opened before I could insert the key, swinging inward on its own momentum. Inside, everything was period appropriate except for one thing. A modern digital recorder sat on the nightstand, its red LED indicating it was recording. I picked it up and played back the only file. My own voice, but older, raspier. "If you're hearing this, it means you found the coordinates. Don't trust the radio. The pump isn't real. The town isn't abandoned. You're not alone. They've been waiting since 1971, and you're exactly where they want you. The only way out is..." The recording cut to static. The room's phone rang. Not a modern ring, but the harsh bell of an old rotary phone. I hadn't noticed it before. Black bakelite on the desk by the window. I answered. "Sir, this is the front desk. There's been a complaint about noise from your room." "I haven't made any noise." "Sir, the other guests are complaining about the screaming." "What other guests? The motel looks empty." "Sir, please keep the noise down. This is your third warning." The line went dead. Third warning? I'd just arrived. I looked out the window. My car was gone. In its place sat a vehicle I recognized from old family photos. My father's 1969 Plymouth, the one he'd sold years before I was born. Or had he? Memory felt suddenly negotiable, facts sliding around like unsecured cargo. The AM radio in my pocket came alive again. Subject is experiencing the merge. Brainwaves indicate resistance. Increase frequency modulation. A high-pitched tone emanated from the radio, just at the edge of hearing. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I saw the room differently. Occupied. A man sat on the bed, his back to me, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He wore clothes that looked familiar. My clothes, the ones I was currently wearing. He turned, and I saw my father's face, but younger, maybe 30. His mouth moved, shaping words I couldn't hear. The pitch from the radio increased, and suddenly I could make them out. "You shouldn't have come. They make you come." Over and over, since 1971. The vision shattered. I was alone again, but the bedspread showed the depression where someone had been sitting. I ran from the room, leaving the key behind. The parking lot stretched further than before, or maybe my legs weren't working right. Each step felt like walking through water, resistance building with every movement. The office light was off now, the motel sign completely dark. My car, the blue sedan, not the Plymouth, sat at the far end of the lot. I fumbled for my keys, and they were already in my hand, warm like the room key had been. Inside the car, the radio was tuned to 1470 AM, volume at maximum. Contact established. Subject's resistance is lower than previous iterations. Memory fragmentation occurring on schedule. Prepare for extraction at midnight. I turned the key. The engine started, but the gear shift wouldn't budge from park. Through the windshield, I saw them. Not clearly, never clearly, but shapes that suggested people standing just outside the throw of the headlights. They didn't move closer, didn't need to. They were waiting for midnight. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m., but hadn't it just been 6:19? Time had jumped, or I had lost it, or it had been taken from me. My phone was dead, the screen black no matter how many times I pressed the power button. The figures outside began to move. Not toward me, but in a slow circle around the car, maintaining their distance. The radio voice returned, different now, familiar. "Son, if you can hear this, don't fight them. I fought for years, and it only makes it worse. They're not what you think. They're not from here. They're from..." My father's voice cut out, replaced by that clinical narrator. Previous subject attempting contact, adjusting frequency to prevent contamination. I grabbed the portable radio and threw it against the dashboard. It cracked but kept broadcasting. Violence is expected. Subject will calm soon. The integration process requires acceptance. The oil pump's rhythm echoed in my head, that impossible motion without wind. Had I ever left the pump? Was I still there, watching it? The rest just delusion? My hands on the steering wheel looked wrong. Older, with scars I didn't remember getting. The figures stopped moving. One stepped forward, just enough for the headlights to catch the edge of a face. It was the gas station clerk, but his features kept shifting, as if I was seeing him through disturbed water. He raised his hand and pointed at the clock. 11:59 p.m. "The extraction will be complete in 60 seconds, the radio announced. Subject will be processed and returned to origin point for next iteration. Memory will be adjusted to ensure compliance. Iteration. They'd used that word before. How many times had I made this drive? Found those coordinates? Heard my father's voice on a radio that shouldn't exist? The clock turned to midnight. The world dissolved. Not dramatically, but like a television slowly losing signal. The edges first, then working inward. The last thing I saw was my reflection in the rearview mirror, but it wasn't quite my face. It was older, younger, different angles all at once. All the iterations, maybe, collapsed into a single moment. Then darkness. I opened my eyes. I was driving on Highway 67, approaching Marfa. The late afternoon sun painted the desert in familiar shades of rust and shadow. My phone, fully charged, showed 5:15 p.m. On the passenger seat lay a folded paper I didn't remember placing there. Coordinates. A radio frequency, 1470 AM. I knew I shouldn't follow them. Something deep in my brain, some primitive warning system, screamed at me to turn around. But my hands were already turning the wheel, following the route that would lead me to an unnamed ghost town, where an oil pump moved without wind. The radio crackled to life without me turning it on. Subject approaching. Iteration 247 commenced. All units prepare for standard sequence. I wanted to stop, to turn back, but the road had already narrowed to a single possibility. In the distance, I could see it, the rhythmic rise and fall of the pump arm, keeping time like a metronome. Counting down to something that had already happened. That would happen again. The ghost town waited, patient as death, while the AM frequencies carried voices that knew my name, my car, my future. I pressed the accelerator, rushing toward an appointment I'd already kept hundreds of times. The sun continued its descent, and somewhere in the static between stations, my father's voice whispered a warning I'd never quite hear in time. Story 10. The sound of waves should have been deafening. That's what struck me first about the Clifftop Lodge, how the Atlantic crashed against the rocks 200 feet below with such violence that the spray reached halfway up the cliff face. Yet when I stepped onto my room's balcony, the roar, simply, wasn't there. Like someone had turned down the volume on reality itself. I'd driven 6 hours up the Oregon coast to reach this place, following increasingly narrow roads that twisted through fog-shrouded forests. The lodge perched on the edge of the world, a sprawling Victorian structure that seemed to lean into the void as if contemplating a jump. Paint peeled from its weathered boards in long strips, and the windows, God, there were so many windows, reflected the gray October sky like dead eyes. The receptionist had been a woman of indeterminate age, her face somehow both young and ancient, features that shifted subtly when I wasn't looking directly at her. She'd handed me an old brass key attached to a wooden tag marked 7 and pointed toward the stairs without saying a word. Her finger, I noticed, trembled slightly, as if the simple act of pointing required tremendous effort. Room 7 occupied the northeast corner of the second floor. The door opened onto a space that felt larger than it should have been, with dark wood paneling that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. The furniture looked original, a 4-poster bed with faded burgundy curtains, a writing desk that had seen better decades, and a rotary phone that belonged in a museum. Everything carried the weight of accumulated years, as if time itself had pooled in the corners like dust. The balcony doors were already open when I arrived, white curtains billowing inward despite the absence of any discernible breeze. I could see the ocean churning below, massive waves throwing themselves against the cliffs in silent fury. The disconnect made my inner ear rebel, expecting thunder and receiving whispers. When I pulled the doors closed, the sound rushed back all at once, a wall of noise so sudden and complete that I stumbled backward, my ears ringing. That first evening, I ordered room service. The knock came precisely at 7, but when I opened the door, the hallway stood empty, except for a silver tray on the carpet. The food was hot, steam still rising from the soup, yet I hadn't heard footsteps arriving or departing. I ate at the small round table by the window, watching darkness creep across the water like spilled ink. The table left a ring. I noticed it when I moved my plate, a perfect circle of moisture on the dark wood, despite the fact that nothing had been wet. I wiped it with my napkin, but the mark remained, as if it had been there for years, as if it had always been there. The phone rang at 11:17. 2 sharp rings, then silence. I picked up the receiver and heard nothing, not even static, just a void that pulled at something behind my eyes. When I checked the phone's base, I found a small leather notebook tucked underneath. Inside, in spidery handwriting, was a list of calls. The last entry, Room 0, 11:17 p.m. There was no Room 0. I'd passed rooms 1 through 6 on my way up. The numbering made no sense, but then again, nothing about this place adhered to normal logic. The hallway itself seemed to stretch and contract when I wasn't paying attention, doorways appearing and disappearing in my peripheral vision. I couldn't sleep. The bed was comfortable enough, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt watched. Not from outside. The curtains were drawn tight, but from within the room itself, from the walls, from the dark spaces between the furniture. At 3 a.m., I gave up and went to splash water on my face. The bathroom mirror showed my reflection, haggard and pale, but behind me, the room looked different. Subtle changes. The writing desk was closer to the bed. The phone had moved to the nightstand, and there, in the corner where 2 walls met, was the faint outline of a window that didn't exist when I turned around. Dawn brought no relief. The morning light that filtered through the curtains was wrong. Too thin, too gray, as if it had traveled through more than just glass to reach me. I dressed quickly and went downstairs, needing to escape the oppressive atmosphere of room 7. The receptionist was exactly where I'd left her, as if she hadn't moved in the 12 hours since my arrival. She looked up when I approached, that same shifting quality to her features that made it impossible to hold her face in memory. I asked about the phone call, about room 0. She tilted her head slightly, the gesture both curious and pitying, then pointed to the wall behind the desk. A collection of framed photographs documented the lodge's history, black and white images dating back to its construction in 1892. She tapped one photo specifically, dated 1954. The image showed the lodge from the outside, taken from the cliff path. I could identify room 7 by its corner position, and there, clear as day, were 3 windows on the visible wall. 3. My room only had 2. I studied the photo, trying to convince myself it was a different room, a trick of perspective, anything but what my eyes insisted on seeing. The receptionist watched me with an expression I couldn't read, her mouth moving slightly as if she were speaking words I couldn't hear. When I looked back at the photo, something else had changed. In one of room 7's windows, barely visible, was the silhouette of a figure, standing exactly where I had stood the night before. I returned to my room with shaking hands. The water ring on the table had grown. Not larger, but deeper somehow, as if it were boring through the wood towards some impossible depth. When I placed my palm over it, I felt cold that had nothing to do with temperature. A cold that seemed to pull heat not just from my hand, but from the concept of warmth itself. The phone rang again. This time I counted. 2 rings, then silence, then 2 more, then silence. The pattern continued, and each time I reached for the receiver, the ringing stopped just before my fingers made contact. The leather notebook now showed multiple entries, all from room 0, all at times I didn't remember. 3:33 a.m., 4:44 a.m., 5:55 a.m. Had I slept? Had I been awake? The boundaries between states of consciousness were dissolving. I packed my bags. Whatever this was, I needed to leave. But when I tried to lift my suitcase, it wouldn't budge. Not heavy, stuck. As if it had fused with the floor. My laptop bag, same thing. Even my jacket refused to move. The room was claiming my possessions. Panic rose in my throat. I abandoned my belongings and headed for the door, but the handle turned without effect. Not locked. The mechanism worked perfectly, but the door simply didn't acknowledge the turning. It remained closed with the solidity of a wall. The balcony. I rushed to the glass doors and they opened easily. Too easily. The sound of waves vanished instantly, replaced by that horrible quasi-silence. The railing was low, dangerously low, and I felt a pull. Not wind, not vertigo, but something else. An invitation from the void. I stumbled backwards, slamming the doors. The wave sound returned, but now it carried whispers in the white noise. The more I strained to understand them, the less like ocean they sounded, until I realized I was hearing breathing from everywhere and nowhere. The water ring on the table had become a hole, not through the table, through space itself. I could see into it, down into a darkness that had depth but no features, like looking into the pupil of an enormous eye. As I watched, transfixed, something moved in that darkness, something that had been waiting. The third window appeared at sunset. Not suddenly, it had always been there. I simply hadn't been able to see it until now. It showed a view that didn't match the others. Not the ocean, not the cliff, but another room. A room exactly like mine, except everything was reversed. Mirror image. And in that room, standing at a table with a perfect water ring, was someone who looked exactly like me, staring back through glass that shouldn't exist. He moved when I moved, breathed when I breathed. But his eyes were wrong. They reflected too much light, like an animal's eyes in the dark. When I stepped closer to the window, so did he, until we were separated by mere inches of impossible glass. I could see every detail of his face, my face, except for one thing. He had no reflection in the window between us. Where his reflection should have been, there was only darkness, only depth. The phone rang. In both rooms, I watched my duplicate answer his receiver, saw his mouth move in perfect synchronization as I spoke my trembling greeting. But the voice that answered wasn't his, wasn't mine. It came from somewhere else, somewhere that had never been mapped or measured. "Room 0 is ready for you," it said, in tones that made my bones ache. "It's always been ready." The water ring had widened into a portal the size of a dinner plate. Through it, I could see stairs leading down, not the lodge's carpeted stairs, but stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. They descended beyond the reach of light, towards spaces that predated architecture, predated human occupation of this coast, predated perhaps even the land itself. My duplicate smiled. Not my smile. Something else wearing my face had learned to approximate the expression. He pressed his palm against the glass between us, and I felt compelled to match the gesture. Our hands met, separated by that impossible barrier, and I felt the glass beginning to soften, to yield, to admit passage between worlds that should never intersect. The receptionist stands in my doorway now, though I never heard it open. She's holding another key, another wooden tag. This one is marked 0. She doesn't speak, maybe she can't, but her meaning is clear. The choice is mine. Accept the key and descend those stone stairs to whatever room 0 contains, or remain here, in a room that's slowly forgetting how to be a room, slowly remembering what it was before humans came to dress it up in wood and plaster. The third window is cracking. Hair-thin fractures spread across its surface like a web, each tiny failure of the glass accompanied by a sound like breaking bones. My duplicate has stopped smiling. He's pressing against the glass now with both hands, and I can see others behind him. So many others, all with my face, all trying to push through. The water ring has become a whirlpool, reality spiraling down into its impossible depths. The phone rings constantly now, an endless trill that harmonizes with itself into something almost like music, almost like screaming. The walls breathe. The floor pulses. The ceiling has started to show stars, not through it, but in it, as if the wood and plaster were merely a thin skin over an infinite cosmos. I take the key from the receptionist. It's heavier than it should be, dense with possibility. Room 0 awaits. Has always awaited. Will always await. The stone steps call to me with a voice like drowning, like sleeping, like coming home to a place I've never been but have always known. The third window shatters, but there's no sound. There never was. Sound is just another consensus we've agreed upon, another comfortable lie to paper over the vast indifference of reality. My duplicate steps through, and then another, and another. We fill the room. All of us, all of me. Until I can't tell which one started this journey up the Oregon coast, which one drove those 6 hours through fog and forest to arrive at a lodge that might not exist, might never have existed, might exist in too many ways at once. The receptionist nods toward the water ring portal. The stone steps beckon. Room 0 promises answers to questions I haven't learned to ask yet. I approach the portal, key in hand, while all my duplicates watch with eyes that reflect too much light. I descend, or I don't. Or I'm still standing there, frozen between moments, between decisions, between states of being. The lodge groans around me, remembering itself, forgetting itself. Time hiccups. I'm checking in again, accepting a brass key marked 7. I'm on the balcony, discovering the silence where sound should be. I'm answering a phone that rings twice and stops. I'm looking at a photograph from 1954, seeing 3 windows where 2 should be. I'm always here. I've never been here. The waves crash silently against the cliffs. The waves roar with deafening force. The waves speak in languages that predate words. Room 0 doesn't exist in the same way other rooms exist. It exists in the spaces between heartbeats, in the moment between sleep and waking. It's every room and no room. I hold the key. I've always held the key. We descend together toward room 0, toward the truth the lodge has been keeping. The receptionist smiles. She's young, she's ancient. She's the lodge itself, given just enough form to hand out keys and point at photographs that tell lies that are also truths. In room 0, I understand. Or I will understand. Or I understood once and have spent eternity forgetting, climbing back up to room 7 to start the cycle again. The phone rings twice and stops. It always has. The third window shows what's really there, what's always been there, waiting behind the comfortable fiction of solid walls. I am in room 7, packing to leave in the morning. I am in room 0, learning why morning is just another story we tell ourselves. I am everywhere the lodge is, everywhere it was, everywhere it will be. The water ring spreads across every surface now, marking territory. The third window opens onto infinite rooms, each containing another version of this moment. We watch each other through glass that shouldn't exist, all of us trapped in the lodge's digestive system, slowly being broken down into components it can use to maintain the illusion of being just a building. Room 0 waits at the bottom of stone steps that exist in no architectural plan. It waits for guests to notice the water rings, the third window, the phone calls from nowhere. It waits for us to accept the key, to descend, to join the others who've made this journey before. I am descending now. The stone steps are cold beneath my feet. They spiral down through geology that makes no sense, through strata of compressed time. I can hear the waves again, but they're inside now, inside the walls, inside my skull. The key grows heavier with each step. Room 0 has always been my destination. Every road I've ever taken led here, to this descent, to this unlocking of doors that should remain closed. I reach the bottom of the stairs. Time doesn't work right here, in the approaches to Room 0. The key in my hand grows impossibly heavy, pulling me toward a door that exists only when observed. Inside Room 0, there is no inside or outside. There's only the lodge dreaming itself into existence, and all of us caught in its architecture like insects in amber, forever arriving, forever descending, forever discovering that third window that shouldn't exist. The phone rings twice in Room 7. Someone new will answer. The cycle continues. And I am the water ring on the table, perfect and impossible. I am every guest who's ever descended these stairs. And I am none of them. I am Room 0, and Room 0 is me, and we are the lodge's dream of itself. The waves are silent until you listen. Then they're all you can hear. Forever. Story 11. The weather vane hadn't moved in 3 hours. I stood in the dying Montana light, watching that rusted arrow point directly at me as I circled the old barn. West, east, north, didn't matter where I walked. The arrow tracked me like a compass needle drawn to some terrible magnetic north that lived inside my chest. The wind pushed hard from the southwest, strong enough to bend the tall grass into waves, but the weather vane remained perfectly still, except for its slow, deliberate rotation following my movements. My friend had asked me to help out at his ranch while he dealt with family matters back east. Simple enough. Feed the cattle, check the fences, keep an eye on things. The kind of favor you don't think twice about, especially when the alternative is another week staring at the walls of my apartment in Billings, trying to pretend the divorce papers weren't still sitting on my kitchen table. The ranch sprawled across 40 acres of grassland about an hour outside Bozeman, tucked into a valley where cell service came and went like a fever dream. Mountains rose on 3 sides, their peaks already dusted with October snow. Beautiful country, the kind that made you understand why people used to believe in manifest destiny. Also the kind that made you understand why those same people sometimes went mad from isolation. That first evening, I'd noticed the fence posts. Running my hand along the weathered wood, checking for breaks or loose wire, I'd felt the rough indentations on the inside, handprints pressed into the grain, dozens of them, all facing inward toward the pastures. The wood was old, maybe 50 years, and the prints had darkened with age and weather. But they were unmistakably human hands, different sizes, some overlapping others, creating a pattern that ran the entire length of the fence line. I'd tried to convince myself they were nothing, kids playing, ranch hands leaving their mark over the decades. But they were only on the inside of the fence. Every single one faced the pastures, as if whoever made them had been trying to push their way out. The cattle wouldn't use the north gate. I discovered this the second morning when I tried to move them to the upper pasture for fresh grazing. They approached in their lazy way, following the feed bucket, until they reached that particular gate. Then they stopped. Not gradually, not with the usual bovine confusion, but all at once, forming a perfect semicircle exactly 15 feet from the opening. They stood there, breathing steam in the cold morning air, eyes reflecting something I couldn't name. I shook the bucket, called to them. Even tried pushing the lead cow, a big Hereford with a white face. She wouldn't budge. None of them would. They just stood there in that unnatural formation, waiting. After 20 minutes, I gave up and led them to the south pasture instead. They followed without hesitation. The VHF radio started on the third night. I was sitting in the ranch house kitchen nursing a beer and watching the mountains disappear into darkness when the static burst from the old radio on the counter. These ranches all had VHF sets, useful for emergencies when the cell towers couldn't reach. This one looked older than me, its plastic yellowed and cracked, held together with electrical tape. The static rose and fell in waves like breathing. Then cutting through the white noise came a voice, low and rough, as if the speaker had been screaming for hours or hadn't spoken in years. It said my name, my first name, drawing out the middle syllable until it became something else, something that made my skin crawl. Then coordinates, numbers spoken in that same damaged voice, latitude and longitude. I grabbed a pen, wrote them down with a shaking hand. When I checked them against the ranch map tacked to the wall, my stomach dropped. The coordinates marked the small corral behind the barn, the one my friend had said they didn't use anymore. I should have left it alone. Should have finished my beer, gone to bed, forgotten about it. But something, curiosity, stupidity, or maybe something else, pulled me outside. The corral sat in full moonlight, its fence posts casting sharp shadows across the packed earth. I approached slowly, flashlight in hand, though I didn't really need it. The space was maybe 30 feet across, circular, with a rusty water trough on one side. Nothing special, nothing that should have warranted coordinates broadcast over a radio frequency no one had used in years. That's when I saw the boot prints. They started in the center of the corral, pressed deep into the dirt despite the lack of recent rain. Size 11, my size. The prints led from the center to the fence, where they stopped. Not turned around, not climbed over, just stopped, as if whoever made them had walked straight through the fence posts. But here's what made my hands go cold. The prints faced outward. The heel marks were on the inside, the toes pointing out. Someone hadn't walked into the center of the corral. They'd walked out from it, starting from nothing, from empty air, and headed toward the fence. I backed away, turned to run, and froze. The weather vane on the barn was pointing at me again, its arrow steady despite the wind that pushed my hair across my face. The next morning, I found more handprints on the fences, fresh ones, the wood still damp around them. They followed the path I'd walked the night before, from the house to the corral and back. Always on the inside of the fence, always pressing outward. The cattle had moved during the night. I found them arranged in that same perfect semicircle around the north gate, standing silent in the dawn mist. When they saw me, they didn't scatter or approach for feeding. They just stood there, watching, their breath forming a cloud that hung in the still air. I tried calling my friend. The phone rang once before cutting to static, the same rhythmic breathing I'd heard on the VHF. Through the white noise, I heard my name again, stretched and distorted. Then new coordinates. This time they led to the barn's loft. I climbed the ladder with my heart hammering against my ribs. The loft was empty except for old hay bales and rusted equipment. Dust motes swirled in the light streaming through gaps in the walls. In the far corner, scratched into the floorboards, were words. Dozens of them, overlapping, carved by different hands over what must have been decades. I am watching me. He is here inside the fence, keeps me in. I walked out, but I'm still here, and in fresher cuts. The wood still pale and splintered. Check your boots. I looked down. My boots were caked with dirt, fresh dirt from the corral. But I hadn't been there since the night before. Had I? The memory felt slippery, like trying to hold water. I remembered walking to the corral, seeing the prints, coming back. But there was something else, wasn't there? Something between seeing the prints and returning to the house. A gap in my memory like a missing tooth. The VHF crackled downstairs. I descended the ladder and approached the radio, my boots leaving dirt trails on the clean floor. The voice came through clearer this time, less damaged. It spoke coordinates again. But now I recognized something in the roughness, in the way it stretched my name. It sounded like me, like my voice if I'd been screaming, or if I'd been underground. The coordinates led to the main pasture. I didn't want to go, but my feet moved anyway, carrying me across the yard and through the gate. The cattle parted as I passed, their eyes tracking something that seemed to be walking beside me, though I saw nothing there. In the center of the pasture, the grass grew in a perfect circle, taller and darker than the surrounding area. The earth was soft here, despite the dry season. As I stood at the edge of the circle, the ground beneath my feet felt warm, almost alive, pulsing with a rhythm I recognized but couldn't name. I knelt and pressed my hand to the earth. It was then I noticed my shadow, or rather shadows. Two of them, cast by the afternoon sun. One belonged to me. The other stood beside it, mimicking my movements with a slight delay, like an echo made visible. The weather vane creaked above, and I looked up to see it spinning now, not following me but rotating faster and faster until it was a blur of rusted metal. The wind had died completely, leaving the ranch in perfect stillness except for that spinning arrow. I stood to leave, and that's when I saw them. Boot prints leading from where I knelt to the fence line. Fresh prints in my size, but I hadn't moved. I was still standing in the same spot. The prints continued beyond the fence, through the grass, disappearing into the tree line. The VHF was calling again when I returned to the house. This time it wasn't coordinates. It was a conversation. Two voices, both mine, talking to each other. "How long have you been here?" "I just arrived. I've always been here." "Are you inside or outside?" "Yes." I grabbed the radio, tried to respond, but my voice came out wrong. Too low, too rough. Like I'd been screaming. Or like I'd been underground. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, watching the weather vane through the window. It pointed at me wherever I moved in the house. Kitchen to living room to bathroom. Always tracking, always watching. At 3 a.m., the cattle started moving. I could see them from the window, their dark shapes flowing like water across the pasture. They were walking in single file, forming patterns in the grass. Circles, spirals, symbols I couldn't interpret. They moved with purpose, with intelligence, creating and destroying their designs over and over until dawn broke across the mountains. When the sun rose, I found new handprints on every fence post I could see from the house, all pressing outward, all the size of my hands. The VHF spoke without static now, clear as if someone stood beside me. "Check the corral." I went. I had to. My feet moved without my permission, carrying me across the yard. The boot prints from 2 nights ago were gone. In their place, a hole had opened in the center of the corral, perfectly circular, about 3 feet across, edges smooth as if cut by machinery. I couldn't see the bottom, even when I shined my flashlight down. The beam just disappeared into darkness that seemed to swallow light. But I could hear something down there, breathing, the same rhythmic breathing from the radio static. I leaned closer, and a hand pressed against mine, not from above, but from below, through the earth, matching my hand perfectly on the underside of the ground. I felt its warmth, its familiar calluses, my calluses. The weather vane spun faster, shrieking on its rusty axis. The cattle formed their semicircle at the north gate, waiting. The radio spoke coordinates that led nowhere and everywhere, numbers that described a location that existed in the same space as the ranch, but separated by something thinner than paper and more absolute than death. I understood then. The fence wasn't to keep anything in or out. It was to mark the boundary between 2 states of being. The handprints weren't trying to escape. They were trying to maintain the barrier, to keep the inside inside and the outside outside. But I had disturbed something. Or maybe I had always been the disturbance. I looked at my hands, dirt under the fingernails. But was it from touching the earth, or from climbing up through it? My memories felt doubled, tripled, arriving at the ranch, but also being here already, waiting. Walking to the corral, but also emerging from it. Standing on the ground, but also pressing up against its underside. The hole in the corral widened, not gradually but in jumps, like stop-motion animation. 3 feet, 5, 8. The darkness below wasn't empty, it was full, populated by something that moved with familiar gestures, that wore my face and spoke with my voice, but from a throat that had been screaming or silent for longer than the ranch had existed. I tried to call my friend again. The phone worked this time, rang through, and he answered. But the voice wasn't his. It was mine, older, rougher, telling me he'd been waiting, that the ranch had been waiting, that the weather vane had been pointing at this moment since before it was built. "Are you coming home?" the voice asked. "I am home," I heard myself answer, though I hadn't spoken. The cattle broke their formation, scattering across the pasture in patterns that spelled out messages in languages that predated words. The weather vane finally stopped, pointing not at me but at the hole in the corral. The radio broadcast coordinates to places that existed in the same physical space but separated by time, by possibility, by the thin membrane between being and having been. I walked to the hole because I had already walked to it, would always be walking to it. The darkness below resolved into a face, my face, looking up with eyes that had seen the ranch from angles that shouldn't exist. It smiled, and I felt my own mouth mirror the expression. "Trade places?" It asked, or I asked, or we asked together. The answer was yes, had always been yes, would always be yes. I descended, or ascended, or stayed exactly where I was while everything else moved around me. The earth closed overhead like water, and I breathed dirt that tasted like radio static. My hands pressed against the underside of the world, leaving prints that would weather into the wood of fences that hadn't been built yet. Above me, or below me, or beside me, footsteps crossed the yard. My footsteps walking to the house, sitting in the kitchen, drinking beer and watching the mountains, living my life, or all the lives that started when someone answered a friend's call for help and drove out to a ranch near Bozeman, where the weather vane pointed at truths too large for a single body to contain. I tried to scream, but the sound came out as coordinates, numbers that would crackle through the VHF in 3 days, or 3 years ago, or right now, calling to the version of me that hadn't arrived yet, that had always been here, that was listening to the radio and writing down the location of the corral where he would find his own footprints walking out from nothing. The weather vane spins or stands still. The cattle arrange themselves in patterns or graze randomly. The fence posts hold handprints or smooth wood. All of it true. None of it true. True in different layers of the same moment, separated by boundaries thinner than thought. I am in the house, drinking beer. I am underground, breathing earth. I am walking to the corral for the first time. I am walking to the corral for the last time. I am the voice on the radio. I am the silence between the static. The ranch continues. It has always continued. It will always continue. And somewhere in its 40 acres, in its multiple states of being, versions of me check fences and feed cattle and listen to radios that speak in voices we recognize but can't quite place. The weather vane knows where we all are. It points to us, through us, as us. And we point back, our hands pressed against barriers that exist to be crossed, that must never be crossed, that have already been crossed before the ranch was built, before Montana was named, before the earth learned to distinguish between above and below. My friend will return or has never left or was never my friend, but another version of me, older, who knew what the ranch was and needed someone to take his place in the circulation of selves that keeps the boundary stable, that keeps the inside inside and the outside outside. Or maybe none of this happened. Maybe I'm still in my apartment in Billings, staring at divorce papers, imagining an escape to a ranch that exists only in the desperate geography of minds that have run out of places to run. But I can feel the dirt under my fingernails. I can hear the weather vane spinning. I can see the cattle forming their impossible patterns. And somewhere, in a kitchen that exists in the same space but a different state, another me is discovering the VHF radio for the first time, hearing his name stretched into something unrecognizable, writing down coordinates with a shaking hand. He'll check the corral. He always does. We always do. I always do. The watching continues. though it's unclear who watches whom, or if the distinction matters when all the eyes are the same eyes, seeing from different angles of the same twisted moment that the ranch has created, or revealed, or always was. The fence posts hold us in, or out, or both. The weather vane points at the truth, or at all the truths, or at the spaces between truths where we exist in superposition, neither here nor there, but somehow everywhere within the boundaries of 40 acres that are larger inside than outside. I am helping a friend with his ranch. I am the friend. I am the ranch. I am the help it needs. All true in the place where the weather vane points, where the cattle won't pass, where the radio speaks in voices we recognize too well to acknowledge. The sun sets or rises or both simultaneously. Time moves forward and backward and stands still, and in the corral, boot prints appear and disappear, marking paths between states of being that were never meant to touch but do. Here, in this place where the inside presses out and the outside presses in, creating handprints on fences that will stand forever and have already fallen, in the Montana Valley, where all versions of a single moment exist at once, watching each other through eyes that are the same eyes, breathing with lungs that share the same air across impossible boundaries. The story ends. The story continues. The story hasn't started yet. All true in the place where the weather vane points. Story 12. The first time I saw my name in the fogged mirror, I blamed the previous tenant. It was my third morning in the walk-up studio on Orchard Street, and the bathroom's ancient radiator had turned the cramped space into a steam room. Through the condensation on the medicine cabinet mirror, letters appeared backward. My name, traced by an invisible finger. The handwriting was childish, unsteady, nothing like mine. I wiped it away with my palm and thought nothing more of it. The Lower East Side apartment wasn't much. 4 flights up a narrow stairwell that reeked of decades of cooking oil and disappointment. But after 6 months of couch surfing post-divorce, I couldn't be picky. The super, a woman in her 70s who introduced herself only as Ms. Chen, had shown me the place on a sweltering July afternoon. She'd lingered in the doorway while I inspected the studio, her fingers drumming against the doorframe in an irregular rhythm that set my teeth on edge. "Previous tenant leave very quick," she'd said, her English heavily accented but precise. "Very clean man, very quiet. You be quiet too?" I'd assured her I would be. The studio was essentially one room with a kitchenette along the wall and a bathroom so small I could touch both walls with my arms outstretched. The floors creaked with every step, and the single window faced a brick wall so close I could have reached out and touched it. But it was mine, at least for now, and that was enough. The mirror incident started small. That first backward signature I could dismiss. But the next morning, the letters were clearer, more deliberate. The day after that, the handwriting had evolved, the curves of the letters matching the way I signed receipts when I was in a hurry. By the end of the first week, it was unmistakably my hand, my signature, appearing in reverse on that fogged surface every morning without fail. I tested it, of course. One night I drew a symbol on a piece of paper, a meaningless design of intersecting triangles and circles that I invented on the spot. I studied it for a full minute, then burned the paper in the sink and washed the ashes down the drain. The next morning, after my shower, there it was in the steam. My symbol, perfectly reproduced but with subtle additions. Lines I had considered but not drawn. Curves that completed the pattern in ways I hadn't consciously imagined, but that felt inevitable, like recovering a memory rather than seeing something new. The bathroom began to feel wrong. Not just the mirror. The entire space seemed to pulse with a presence I couldn't name. The fluorescent light would flicker in patterns that almost seemed like Morse code. The tap would drip in rhythms that resembled heartbeats, speeding up whenever I stood before the mirror. The grout between the tiles formed patterns that shifted in my peripheral vision, geometric designs that made my eyes water if I tried to focus on them directly. I started showering at the gym 3 blocks away. For 2 weeks, this worked. The apartment felt normal again, just another overpriced box in Manhattan's endless grid. I could almost convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, that the stress of the divorce and the move had triggered some kind of brief psychological episode. My therapist would have called it projection, or externalized anxiety. I was ready to believe her. Then I found the second mirror. I was coming home late from a freelance gig, climbing the 4 flights in darkness because the stairwell bulb had burned out again. As I turned the corner to my floor, my phone's flashlight caught something leaning against the wall outside my door. A medicine cabinet mirror, identical to the one in my bathroom. I approached it slowly, the floorboards groaning under my weight. My initials were already there, fogged into the glass as if by breath, though the hallway was cold and dry. I knocked on Ms. Chen's door 1 flight down. She answered after a long moment, wearing the same floral housecoat I'd seen her in every day since I'd moved in. Her apartment smelled of medicinal tea and something else, something organic and unsettling, like fruit left too long in the sun. "Someone left a mirror outside my door," I told her. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "No one changes mirrors here," she said. "Not for many years. But there's definitely no one changes mirrors." She began to close the door, then paused. "You should not look too long. Mirrors remember." Before I could ask what she meant, the door clicked shut. The mirror was gone when I returned to my floor. Not moved. Gone. No sign it had ever been there except for a rectangle of dust on the floor, outlining where it had leaned. I ran my finger through the dust and it felt warm, almost fevered. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my reflection multiplied infinitely, each version slightly wrong. A smile too wide, eyes that blinked at different intervals, hands that moved independently of my will. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and made coffee, sitting at the small table by the window and staring at the brick wall outside. That's when I noticed the window in the building across the narrow air shaft. It had never been there before. I was certain of it. Where there should have been unbroken brick, a window now faced mine, its curtains drawn but glowing faintly from within. As I watched, a shadow passed behind the curtains. It stopped, as if looking out at me, and I had the distinct impression of being observed in return. I pulled my blinds and didn't look again. The morning brought new revelations. When I finally forced myself to use my bathroom, I discovered that the mirror had changed. Not replaced, changed. The glass seemed deeper somehow, as if it extended beyond the wall behind it. When I leaned close, I could see what looked like another room beyond my reflection. A room that should have been my neighbor's apartment, but wasn't. It was my studio, but reversed and wrong. Furniture I didn't own. Pictures on the walls I'd never hung. A quality of light that suggested a different time of day or year. And in that reflected room, something moved. At first, I thought it was my reflection lagging, a delay in the mirror's surface like a glitch in a video feed. But the movement was independent, purposeful, a figure that stayed just at the edge of visibility, present in the periphery but gone when I tried to focus on it directly. It wore my clothes, but moved with an alien grace, performing actions I wasn't making, reaching for objects that didn't exist in my real apartment, reacting to sounds I couldn't hear. I taped newspapers over the mirror. They were gone by evening, torn away from the inside, the pieces scattered on my bathroom floor in a pattern that hurt to perceive. I tried aluminum foil next, but it oxidized overnight, turning black and brittle, falling away in chunks that left rust-colored stains on the tile. Finally, I painted over the glass with black paint, 3 coats thick. The paint bubbled and peeled within hours, forming letters, words, sentences, all in my handwriting, all things I'd thought but never written. You can't unsee yourself. The reflection was always more real. Which side of the glass are you on? The messages grew more personal, more invasive. Details from my divorce that I'd never told anyone. The name I'd called my childhood imaginary friend. The recurring nightmare I'd had since I was 12. All appeared and disappeared in the peeling paint. A conversation with myself that I wasn't consciously participating in. I stopped sleeping in the apartment. I'd drift off in coffee shops, on park benches, in the 24-hour laundromat on Houston Street, but I always had to return eventually, for clothes, for mail, for the pretense of normal life that kept me tethered to consensus reality. Each time, the apartment felt less like mine, Objects moved in subtle ways. A book opened to a different page. A chair angled toward the bathroom door. My laptop displaying searches I hadn't made for terms I didn't understand. The building itself began to feel complicit. The stairs multiplied when I wasn't paying attention. 4 flights becoming 5, then 6, though I always arrived at my door eventually. The hallway stretched and contracted like a throat swallowing. Other tenants passed me without making eye contact, their faces blurred as if seen through frosted glass. When I tried to speak to them, my words came out backward, mirrored, incomprehensible even to myself. I decided to document everything, to create evidence that I could review later, away from the building's influence. But my phone's camera wouldn't focus on the mirror. Photos came out distorted, showing perspectives that shouldn't exist. Views from inside the medicine cabinet looking out, angles from behind my own eyes, images of myself taking the photo from impossible vantage points. Videos were worse. They played backward, or showed events that hadn't happened yet. Me packing boxes I hadn't bought, signing a lease for an apartment I'd never seen, having conversations with people whose faces were always just out of frame. Ms. Chen stopped answering her door. The other tenants, if they existed at all, became shadows and footsteps, never fully materialized. The building felt hollow except for me, and whatever watched from the mirror. I researched the building's history at the library, searching through decades of records. The plot had been continuously built upon since the 1850s, each structure eventually condemned or burned, rebuilt with salvaged materials from its predecessor. The mirrors I discovered were original, installed in the 1920s by a glassmaker who'd lived in what was now my unit. He'd disappeared, according to a brief newspaper item, though his rent had continued to be paid monthly by envelopes slipped under the super's door. The payments had never stopped, even as tenants came and went, even through changes in ownership and management. Was I paying rent? I couldn't remember. My bank statements made no sense, showing transactions in locations I'd never been, in currencies that didn't exist. My signature on documents morphed while I watched, becoming something else, someone else's hand, though always familiar. The breaking point came 3 nights ago. I'd been standing outside my door for an hour, unable to make myself enter. The hallway light had burned out again, or maybe it had never worked. In the darkness, I could hear something moving in my apartment, footsteps that matched my gait, the specific creak of my weight on the loose floorboard by the window. When I finally opened the door, I saw myself already there, sitting at my table, writing in my journal with my hand, my pen, my exact posture. The other me didn't look up, just kept writing. I could see the words forming on the page, the same words I was thinking. The first time I saw my name in the fogged mirror, I blamed the previous tenant. I backed out of the apartment and shut the door, but I could still feel myself in there, continuing to write, to live, to be. Which one was real? The one in the apartment felt more solid, more certain. I was the echo, the reflection, the thing that shouldn't exist. I've been in this coffee shop for 72 hours now. They haven't asked me to leave. Maybe they can't see me. Maybe I'm not here at all. When I look at my reflection in the coffee shop's window, it shows me still in the apartment, going about my routine, showering in that bathroom, confronting that mirror each morning. That version of me seems content, purposeful, real in a way I no longer feel. Sometimes I catch glimpses of other people like me, translucent, displaced, wandering the streets with the hollow look of the reflected. We don't acknowledge each other. To do so would be to confirm what we suspect, that we're on the wrong side of the glass, that our real selves continue without us, that we're the backward writing in the steam, desperately trying to make contact with a world we can see but no longer touch. I return to the building sometimes, drawn by a gravity I can't resist. I stand in the hallway, looking at my door, listening to myself living my life within. Miss Chen passes me without recognition, though sometimes she pauses, sniffs the air, and mutters something in Cantonese that sounds like a prayer or a ward against evil. The mirror knows. It's always known. We think we look into mirrors, but really, they look into us, through us, past us to something more essential than flesh and bone. They show us not what we are, but what we could be, what we should be. what we will be when we finally stop resisting the pull of our own reversed gaze. I'm going back to the apartment tonight, not to reclaim it. That's impossible now. But to stand before that mirror one last time, to look at the thing that wears my face and lives my life, to understand finally which side is real and which is reflection. The answer might destroy what's left of my sense of self, but the not knowing is worse. The building is patient. The mirror is patient. They've been waiting far longer than I've been alive, collecting tenants like specimens, preserving us in glass and steam and backward writing. We check in, but we never really leave. We just shift from one side of the reflection to the other until we forget which side we started on. I can see my handwriting changing as I write this, becoming something else, something that matches the writing in the steam. Soon I won't be able to tell the difference between my thoughts and the mirror's suggestions. Maybe there never was a difference. Maybe every thought I've had since moving in was just the mirror thinking through me, preparing me for this moment of understanding. The coffee shop is closing. They're wiping down the tables, stacking the chairs, but they move around me like water around a stone. I'm already fading, already more there than here. When I stand to leave, my reflection in the window remains seated, still writing, still trying to warn himself about what's coming. But he won't listen. They never do. The first time he sees his name in the fogged mirror, he'll blame the previous tenant. He'll blame me. Story 13. The elevator in my old building in the Loop had always been temperamental, but that Tuesday evening in November, it did something new. Between the 12th and 13th floors, it stuttered to a halt with a mechanical sigh that seemed almost human. The LED display flickered once, twice, then died completely, leaving me in the amber glow of the emergency lighting. I pressed the call button. Nothing. Pressed it again, harder. The silence that answered felt thick, deliberate, as if the building itself was holding its breath. That's when I noticed the manual release lever, old brass, worn smooth by decades of hands that had probably never needed to use it. I pulled it, and the doors groaned open. The hallway that greeted me shouldn't have existed. Dark carpet stretched ahead, the color of dried blood under the dim sconces that lined wood-paneled walls. Two doors faced each other maybe 20 feet down, 12B on the left, 12B on the right. Same brass numbers, same scratched finish around the keyholes. I stepped out, and the elevator doors whispered shut behind me with a finality that made my stomach clench. The air tasted wrong, copper and dust and something else. Something organic that reminded me of opening a long-sealed attic. My footsteps made no sound on that carpet, as if the fibers were swallowing each impact. 5 steps forward, and I was between the two doors. 5 more, and impossibly, I was between them again. The same doors, the same brass numbers catching the same angle of light. I pulled a quarter from my pocket, placed it on the floor against the baseboard to mark my position, walked forward. 5 steps, the identical doors flanked me. I looked back, no quarter, checked my pocket. There it was, warm against my palm, as if it had never left. The mirror at the end of the hall drew my attention then. Gilt-framed, old, the silver backing spotted with age. In it, I could see the elevator behind me, its doors closed. But the elevator car in the reflection was full, packed with people in business attire, all facing forward, all perfectly still. I turned around. The hallway behind me was empty. Back to the mirror. They were still there, maybe a dozen figures, their faces indistinct but their postures rigid, unnatural. One of them, a woman in a navy suit, seemed to be standing exactly where I stood. When I raised my hand, nothing in the reflection moved except the subtle shift of shadows. My phone had no signal. The screen showed the time as 6:47 p.m., but the seconds weren't advancing. Battery at 73%, but the number didn't change even as I watched it, even as I felt the device growing warm in my hand. I tried the door marked 12B on the left. The knob turned easily, too easily, like it wasn't connected to any actual mechanism. The door swung inward to reveal another hallway, identical to the one I stood in. Same carpet, same sconces, same 2 doors marked 12B, same mirror at the end showing the same crowded elevator. The woman in the navy suit had moved. She was closer to the mirror's frame now, her blurred face turned slightly toward where I would be standing. The others hadn't shifted at all. I backed out, tried the right-hand door. This time it opened onto an office, my office, or something wearing its shape. My desk was there, my computer, the framed photo of my ex-wife that I'd never bothered to remove. But everything was wrong in small, crucial ways. The photo showed her smiling, but her eyes were closed. Had they always been closed? The computer screen displayed my email, but the text was backwards, mirror writing that hurt to focus on. The worst part was the window. My real office looked out onto LaSalle Street, 12 floors up. This window showed the same view, but from much higher, maybe the 20th floor, maybe the 30th. The perspective was nauseating, impossible. Cars crawled like insects far below, and among them, I could swear I saw myself walking, briefcase in hand, heading toward the building I was already inside. I slammed the door shut. My breathing echoed in the hallway, too loud, with a delay like I was hearing it played back through speakers hidden in the walls. The woman in the navy suit was definitely looking at me now through the mirror. Her face was still a blur, but something about her posture suggested recognition, expectation. The elevator chimed. I turned to see the doors sliding open, the car empty and well lit, the display showing a crisp 12. I practically dove inside, jabbing the button for the lobby. The doors closed with their familiar wheeze, and the car descended smoothly. The display counted down normally, 11, 10, 9. But at the 3rd floor, it stopped again. Same mechanical sigh, same death of the display, same amber emergency lighting. Number. No, I wasn't doing this again. I reached for the emergency call button, ready to scream for help if necessary, but my hand stopped inches away. There was already a voice coming through the speaker, soft, muffled, but unmistakably mine. Hello? Can anyone hear me? I'm stuck between 12 and 13. The door opened, but there's this hallway that... My own voice, playing back words I hadn't said yet. Or had I? The timestamp on the security monitor above the buttons read, Tuesday, November 12th, 6:47 p.m. The same time my phone had frozen at. The manual release lever beckoned. I didn't pull it. I couldn't. I stood there, hands shaking, listening to my voice grow increasingly panicked through the speaker, describing a hallway I refused to look at again. After what felt like hours but was probably seconds, the elevator shuddered back to life. The display illuminated 3, then 2, then L. The lobby was blindingly normal. People coming and going, the security guard reading his paper, traffic visible through the revolving doors. I stumbled out, my legs unsteady, and made it 3 steps before the security guard looked up. Working late again? He smiled, the same smile as always. You know, you just missed yourself. Saw you leave maybe 5 minutes ago. You feeling all right? You look a little pale. I mumbled something about not feeling well and pushed through the revolving doors into the Chicago wind. It was starting to snow, fat flakes that melted immediately on the warm pavement. I looked up at the building, counting floors. 12 windows up, then 13, nothing between them. Of course there wasn't. But in the reflection of the building across the street, in those mirror-dark windows I could see it. A thin line of light between 12 and 13, like someone had drawn it in with a pencil. And in one of those impossible windows, a figure in a navy suit stood watching. I took the stairs in my new building. Every day for 3 months I took the stairs, until my legs ached and my lungs burned, until my coworkers joked about my new fitness obsession. I let them think that's what it was. Then last week, running late for a meeting, I broke my rule. Just once, I thought. What were the odds? The elevator in the new building was modern, fast, efficient. It climbed smoothly past 8, 9, 10, and stopped between 12 and 13. The display didn't die this time. Instead, it showed something else. 12.5. A floor that didn't exist in a building that had never had one. My phone buzzed with a text from my own number. The woman in the navy suit says hello. I deleted the message, but it came back. Deleted it again. It reappeared with a photo attached. The hallway with the dark carpet, taken from the perspective of someone standing between those two impossible doors. In the mirror at the end, I could see myself in the elevator, looking at my phone, looking at a photo of a hallway in which there was a mirror showing me in an elevator. The loop made my vision swim. When I looked up from the phone, the elevator doors were open. Not onto my floor. Not onto any floor that should have existed. The dark carpet stretched ahead. The two doors waited, both marked 12B. But this time, one of them was slightly ajar, and from the gap came a sound that made my skin crawl. Typing. The steady rhythm of fingers on a keyboard, writing something, writing endlessly. I recognized the rhythm. It was mine. The same pattern I fell into when I was deep in a report. The same occasional pause to think. The same quick burst to finish a sentence. The woman in the navy suit stood at the end of the hallway now, no longer confined to the mirror. Her face wasn't a blur anymore. It was an absence, a void where features should have been. But somehow I knew she was smiling. "You can't keep taking the stairs forever," she said, and her voice was my voice, pitched wrong, played backward and forward simultaneously. "Every building has a half floor. Most people just never find it. But you did. And now it's finding you everywhere." The elevator doors started to close. I could step back, let them shut, hope the car would continue to my actual floor. Or I could step forward into that impossible hallway and confront whatever waited behind those doors marked 12B. The typing stopped. In the silence, I heard breathing that wasn't mine, coming from both rooms simultaneously, breathing that sounded like it was right behind me, even though I stood alone in the elevator. I made my choice. The doors closed, and the elevator rose. The display showed 13, then 14 normal floors with normal numbers. When it opened at 15, my floor, I stumbled out on legs that barely held me. My assistant asked if I was feeling all right. I told her I was fine, just tired. But I wasn't fine. I'm not fine, because every reflective surface shows them now. The crowded elevator that follows me, full of still figures that never quite come into focus. The woman in the navy suit who stands where I stand, moves when I move, but always a half second off, like she's the original and I'm the echo. And late at night, when the office is empty and I'm working alone, I can hear it. The soft ding of an elevator arriving at a floor that doesn't exist. The whisper of doors opening. The sound of footsteps on dark carpet. Walking 5 steps, arriving nowhere. Walking 5 more. Sometimes I check the building directory in the lobby, and between the listings for the 12th and 13th floors there's a gap. Not enough for a full line of text, but enough to notice. Enough to suggest something that isn't quite there, isn't quite not there. The security guard mentioned something strange yesterday. He said they've been having trouble with the elevators lately, people getting on at one floor, but the weight sensors showing the car is empty, or empty cars showing as full. One elevator that keeps stopping between 12 and 13, though the maintenance crew insists there's nothing wrong with it. "You ever notice anything odd?" he asked me. "You're here late a lot." I told him no. What else could I say? That there's a floor that exists in the spaces between, where the geometry doesn't hold and mirrors show too much truth? That somewhere in this building, there's a version of me sitting at a backwards desk, typing reports in mirror writing, living in a reflection that might be more real than I am? My phone buzzes. Another text from my own number. The door marked 12B is always open now. I don't delete it this time. I know it will just come back. Like the quarter that returns to my pocket. Like the elevator that always stops at 12.5 even when I'm not in it. Like the sound of typing that follows me home, that continues through the night, writing a story I'm afraid to read. Tomorrow, I'll take the elevator again. Not because I want to, but because I can feel the half floor pulling at me, a gravity that gets stronger every day. The woman in the navy suit is waiting. The mirrors are waiting. The dark carpet that swallows sound is waiting. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake at night, is that I'm starting to remember being there before. Not just last week, not just 3 months ago, but years, decades maybe. Taking that same elevator, finding that same hallway, placing that same quarter that always returns. How many times have I written this story? How many times have I lived it? In the reflection of my computer screen, I can see myself typing, but my hands are still. Or are my hands moving while my reflection sits motionless? I don't know anymore. I don't know which side of the mirror I'm on. The elevator dings softly in the distance, arriving at a floor that both exists and doesn't. And I know that tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, I'll pull that brass lever again. I'll step into that hallway. I'll walk those 5 steps that lead nowhere and everywhere. Because maybe that's where I've always been. Maybe that's where I really work. Maybe every time I think I've escaped, I'm just starting the loop again, placing a quarter that's already in my pocket, seeing a reflection that might be the reality, typing a story that types itself. The woman in the navy suit knows. She's always known. She's waiting for me to remember that I'm her, or she's me, or we're both echoes of something that got lost between floors, in a space that shouldn't exist but does, has always existed, will always exist. 12.5, the half floor, where half of me still stands, will always stand, watching through mirrors, waiting for the rest of me to come home. Story 14. I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw how the ice formed on the lake. It was my 3rd morning at the cabin, somewhere deep in the Minnesota wilderness where cell towers were myths, and the nearest neighbor was a 40-minute drive through snow-packed roads. The isolation was exactly what I'd wanted, needed really, after everything that had happened back in the city. But that morning, standing at the frost-covered window with my coffee growing cold in my hands, I stared at something that made no sense. The ice on the lake had formed in a perfectly straight line, dividing the surface into 2 distinct halves. On one side, the water remained liquid, dark and restless, despite the sub-zero temperatures that had persisted for days. On the other, the ice stretched thick and white toward the distant shore. The division was so precise it looked artificial, as if someone had drawn it with a ruler and commanded nature to obey. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe the stress had finally caught up with me, but the line remained, unwavering in its geometric perfection. That was when I noticed the first drops. They clung to the inside of the window like morning dew, except morning dew doesn't form inside a heated cabin. I touched one with my finger, and it was cold, colder than it had any right to be. Looking around the room, I saw them everywhere, on the lampshade, the coffee table, even suspended somehow on the underside of the ceiling fan blades. Each object in the room appeared to have been submerged in water, and then carefully dried on the outside only, leaving these impossible droplets trapped within. The rational part of my mind scrambled for explanations. Condensation from poor insulation, some kind of humidity issue. But condensation doesn't form inside solid objects. It doesn't choose specific items while leaving others completely dry. I spent the rest of that day inspecting every corner of the cabin, checking for leaks, for broken pipes, for any logical source of the moisture. I found nothing. The droplets remained, defying physics and reason, glittering in the pale winter light like tiny eyes watching my growing confusion. That night, I built the fire higher than usual. The warmth should have been comforting, but it only made the cold spots more noticeable. Patches of air that seemed to resist the heat, maintaining their chill despite the roaring flames. I dozed fitfully in the armchair, unable to shake the feeling that the cabin itself was holding its breath, waiting. I woke to find wet boot prints on the rug. They started near the fireplace, each one perfectly formed as if someone had just walked in from the snow. But there was no trail leading to the door, no melting snow, no puddles. The prints simply began, as if their maker had materialized out of the dying embers. They led across the room in measured steps, the stride of someone my height, my build, and stopped directly in front of my bedroom door. Just stopped. No turn, no retreat, as if whoever had made them had simply ceased to exist at that precise spot. My hands shook as I photographed them with my phone, needing proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But when I looked at the images, they showed only the empty rug. I looked back at the floor. The boot prints remained, still damp, still impossible. Sleep became a memory after that. I sat up through the nights, watching, waiting, fighting the exhaustion that pulled at my eyelids. Sometimes I heard things. The creak of footsteps on the porch, the soft splash of something moving through the unfrozen half of the lake. Whispers that might have been wind, but carried the cadence of conversation. On the fifth night, I set up my phone to record video while I forced myself to walk my usual evening routine. Kitchen to bathroom, bathroom to bedroom, bedroom to living room. I needed to prove to myself that nothing was following me, that the sounds I heard were just the old cabin settling. The next morning, I played back the recording. At first, everything seemed normal. I watched myself move through the rooms, my footsteps creating a rhythmic pattern on the wooden floors. But then I heard it, a second set of footsteps, perfectly synchronized with mine but delayed by exactly 3 seconds. Every step I took was echoed, every pause matched, every turn duplicated. I rewound, listened again. The phantom footsteps were clearer now that I knew to listen for them. They had the same weight, the same rhythm. They were my footsteps, just displaced in time. The ice line on the lake had moved closer to shore. I noticed it that afternoon, though moved wasn't quite right. It was still perfectly straight, still impossibly precise, but now it was perhaps 20 feet nearer to the cabin. The unfrozen water had claimed more territory, and in its dark surface, I thought I could see shapes moving. Not fish, something larger, something that moved with purpose rather than instinct. I tried to leave that day, packed my things with shaking hands, threw them in the truck, turned the key. Nothing. The engine wouldn't even turn over. I popped the hood to find the battery cables severed, cut clean through with something sharp. But I had the only key to the cabin, and the nearest person who might have done this was miles away through trackless forest. That's when I found the journal. It was hidden in the bedroom closet, wrapped in an oilcloth that had preserved it perfectly. The first entry was dated 3 winters ago, written in handwriting that looked disturbingly familiar. Day 1. Finally made it to the cabin. The isolation is perfect. I need this time to clear my head after everything that happened. The lake is beautiful, completely frozen over. I flipped through the pages, my chest tightening with each entry. Day 4. Strange thing, the ice on the lake has formed this perfectly straight line. Never seen anything like it. Half frozen, half not. Must be some kind of thermal phenomenon. Day 6. Found boot prints this morning. Wet ones, leading from the fireplace to my bedroom door. No sign of forced entry. Day 8. I can hear my own footsteps from yesterday. I know how insane that sounds, but I recorded it. They follow me, 3 seconds behind, like an echo that shouldn't exist. My hands trembled as I reached the final entry. Day 10. The line is almost at the shore now. I understand what it is. It's not a division between ice and water. It's a boundary between then and now. This place doesn't exist in normal time. It records everything, plays it back, layers moment upon moment until you can't tell what's real and what's echo. I see myself sometimes, walking through the rooms, doing things I did yesterday or will do tomorrow. The water remembers, the cabin remembers, and now I'm part of it, another recording in an endless loop. If someone finds this, the entry cut off mid-sentence, but the truly terrifying part was the signature at the bottom of each entry. The same signature I'd been using my entire life. I compared the handwriting to my own notebook. Identical. Not similar. Identical. Every loop, every line, every subtle quirk that made my penmanship unique. The sun was setting. As darkness crept across the cabin, I noticed new boot prints forming on the rug, manifesting one by one in a steady progression toward my bedroom. But this time, I could see the faint outline of legs above them, transparent and wavering like heat shimmer in reverse. They wore my jeans, my boots. I backed against the wall, watching this phantom version of myself walk my path from 3 nights ago. When it reached the bedroom door, it paused, and for one horrifying moment, I thought it would turn around, but it simply faded, leaving only the wet prints as evidence. The droplets inside the objects had multiplied. They now filled half the volume of the lampshade, turned the coffee table into an aquarium viewed from the wrong side. The water inside them moved with tiny currents, as if connected to the lake outside. That night, I didn't even attempt to sleep. I sat in the center of the room with every light on, watching the ice line through the window. It had advanced again, now only 10 feet from the cabin's foundation. In the unfrozen water, shapes that might have been faces appeared and disappeared, pressing against the boundary like prisoners against glass. At exactly 3 a.m., I heard my own voice. It came from the bedroom, muffled, but recognizable. It was reading something aloud, the journal entries I'd discovered that afternoon. But I had burned the journal hours ago, watched it turn to ash in the fireplace. Yet there was my voice, reading words that no longer existed, spoken by a version of me that shouldn't exist. I crept to the bedroom door, pressed my ear against it. The voice continued, and now I could hear the subtle differences. It was my voice, but rougher, as if I'd been screaming, or as if I'd been here much longer than 5 days. The doorknob turned from the inside. I stumbled backward as the door opened, revealing my bedroom exactly as I'd left it, except for the figure sitting on the bed. It was transparent, like the legs I'd seen earlier, but more substantial. It was me, but older, more haggard, with eyes that held the weight of endless repetition. It looked up from the journal it was reading, the journal I'd burned, and our eyes met. It smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only resignation. "Day 10, it said in my voice. "You're on day 10. I was on day 10. We're all on day 10. "What are you?" I managed to whisper. "The echo," it replied. "Or maybe you're the echo. Hard to tell anymore. This place doesn't record time linearly. Past, present, future. They all exist simultaneously here, bleeding into each other like watercolors in rain." It stood, and I could see through it to the window behind, where the ice line had reached the cabin's foundation. Water was beginning to seep through the walls, not regular water, but the dark, memory-laden water from the lake's unfrozen side. The indigenous people who once lived here knew about this place, the other me continued. They called it the Mirror Lake, but not because of reflections. Because it shows you yourself from every moment you've existed here, all at once. You've been here before. You'll be here again. You're here now. Have always been here now. The water was ankle deep now, impossible and cold, carrying with it the weight of accumulated time. In it, I could see reflections that weren't quite reflections. Myself entering the cabin for the first time. Myself leaving in panic. Myself growing old within these walls, all superimposed like a multiple exposure photograph. "How do I leave?" I asked desperately. The other me laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "You did leave. You will leave. You are leaving. But you also stayed. Will stay. Are staying. Every choice happens here. Every possibility." The water rose higher, and with it came more versions of myself. Some were older, some younger. Though that was impossible, I'd only discovered this cabin 5 days ago. Or had I? My memories felt suddenly uncertain, layered with contradictions. I remembered finding this place online, but I also remembered inheriting it. I remembered driving here alone, but also remembered walking through the forest, lost and freezing, until I found shelter. "The journal," I gasped, struggling to maintain my grip on reality. "Who wrote it?" "You did. You will. You are writing it now." I looked down and found a pen in my hand, the journal, unburned, pristine, in the other. My hands were moving without my conscious control, writing the very words the other me had been reading. "Day 10. The line is almost at the shore now. I understand what it is." "No." I threw the journal across the room, but it dissolved into water before hitting the wall, only to reform in my hands. The versions of myself were speaking now, all of them. A chorus of my own voice describing different experiences of the same events. Some spoke of finding bodies in the lake, my body. Others described escaping, only to find themselves driving back to the cabin years later, compelled by dreams they couldn't quite remember. One version insisted this was all a hallucination, that I was actually in a hospital somewhere, that the cabin was a construct of my deteriorating mind. They were all true. None of them were true. The water had risen to my chest, and in its dark surface I could see not just my past and future, but infinite variations. In some, I was a different person entirely, but still myself. In others, the cabin was a house, a tent, a cave, but always this same trap of recursive time. Why? I asked the original echo, or what I thought was the original. They were all original. None of them were. Because some places are wounds in time, it answered. Spots where causality breaks down, where every moment that ever was or will be in this space exists simultaneously. You didn't find this cabin. It found you. It finds everyone who needs to disappear, who wants to escape, who seeks isolation. And it gives them exactly that, isolation from linear time itself. The water covered my head, but I could still breathe. Or I couldn't breathe but didn't need to. Or I was already dead and remembering the sensation of drowning. All were true. Through the liquid darkness, I could see myself sitting in the armchair by the fire, arriving for the first time. I could see myself running through the forest, fleeing something I couldn't name. I could see myself old and gray, still in this cabin, writing in an endless journal that recorded every iteration of the same 10 days. And then I understood. The ice line wasn't moving toward the cabin. The cabin was moving toward the ice line, drawn into the space between states, between frozen and fluid, between then and now. We were crossing the boundary, had already crossed it, would always be crossing it. I emerged from the water that wasn't water, gasping in the living room that was simultaneously flooded and dry. The other versions of myself were gone, or I was one of them, or we were all the same person experiencing different temporal slices of a single impossible moment. Outside, the ice line had disappeared. The entire lake was neither frozen nor liquid, but something between, something that existed in multiple states simultaneously. In its surface, I could see the reflection of the cabin, hundreds of them, overlapping, each containing a version of me experiencing this revelation for the first time, for the 100th time, forever. I picked up my phone to call for help, but the screen showed multiple timestamps, 3 a.m., 3 p.m., January 15th, July 23rd, 1987, 2024, 2089. My call history showed conversations I hadn't had yet, messages from people I'd never met, photos of places I'd never been but recognized as if from dreams. The boot prints on the rug were everywhere now, crossing and recrossing, a palimpsest of every path I'd walked, would walk, was walking. Some led to doors that didn't exist in this version of the cabin. Others simply ended mid-step, as if their walker had stepped into another iteration entirely. I sit here now, writing this account, though I'm no longer sure if I'm creating it or merely transcribing what was always written. The journal in front of me has entries dated years in the future, decades in the past. My handwriting fills pages I haven't touched yet. Sometimes I catch glimpses of myself in peripheral vision, older versions checking the windows, younger versions discovering the ice line for the first time. We nod to each other in recognition, fellow prisoners in this temporal loop, though I'm beginning to suspect we're not trapped at all. We chose this, we'll choose this, are choosing it now. The ultimate isolation, not from other people, but from sequential time itself. The droplets inside the objects have become oceans. Entire worlds exist within the lampshade, the coffee table, each one containing another version of this story. I've given up trying to determine which is real. They all are. None of them are. Tomorrow I will leave this place. Yesterday I arrived. Today I remain, have always remained, will always remain. The footsteps that echo mine aren't following. They're leading, showing me the path I've already taken. I understand now why the ice formed that perfect line. It wasn't a division between states of matter. It was a boundary between states of being, and I haven't crossed it. I exist along it, stretched across every moment like water freezing and thawing simultaneously. If someone finds this account, know that it's both a warning and an invitation. The cabin is still there, will always be there, has always been there. You've already found it. You're reading this inside it now. You wrote these words yourself, though you don't remember yet. The ice line is moving closer, or maybe you're moving toward it. Both are true. Neither is true. Welcome to the Mirror Lake. You've been here all along.